Tonight, you are about to begin a long and gentle journey through time, distance, and silence. This is not a story meant to be rushed, and it is not a history lesson that demands attention. Instead, this is a calm unfolding of the past, a steady, peaceful narration designed to help your mind slow down and your body relax. What you are listening to is a documentary sleep story that explores the deep and layered history of a land shaped by ice, water, darkness, light, and endurance. A place where time feels wider and quieter. A place where nature has always spoken more loudly than people. This journey will move slowly across centuries, guiding you through landscapes, lives, and moments that together form the long story of Alaska. This video is titled The Entire History of Alaska, Sleep Story and Documentary, and it has been created to be experienced gently. You do not need to remember dates, names, or events. If your thoughts drift, let them drift. If your breathing slows, allow it. And if sleep arrives before the story reaches its end, that is not a mistake. That is the intention. The narration you will hear is intentionally slow, even, and smooth. It is designed for long listening, quiet evenings, late nights, and peaceful rest. You may listen actively, following each sentence as it unfolds, or you may simply allow the sound of the voice to fade into the background as your body unwinds. There is no correct way to listen here. There is only a calm way. As the story begins, you will be guided back to a time long before modern life. You will hear about ancient landscapes shaped by glaciers and seasons, about early human presence, about exploration, settlement, and change. You will move slowly through moments of growth, hardship, and resilience, and eventually into the modern era, always at a pace that respects rest rather than urgency. This story is not told through drama or tension. It focuses instead on atmosphere, routine, and the steady rhythm of time passing. The goal is not to excite the mind, but to ease it, to let history become a quiet companion rather than a subject to analyze. If at any point you lose track of where the story is, that is perfectly fine. You do not need to go back. You do not need to focus harder. Simply let the words continue, knowing that the flow is designed to carry you forward gently, whether you are awake or asleep. This video is part of the Past to Sleep channel, a space created for those who enjoy history told softly, without noise, without urgency, and without stress. Here, the past is not something to rush through. It is something to move through slowly, like a long walk under an open sky. These stories are meant to be companions during quiet hours, helping you unwind after long days and guiding you toward deep rest. If you find comfort in this kind of storytelling, you are warmly invited to support the channel. A simple like helps more people discover these calm history journeys. Subscribing allows you to return whenever you need relaxation, comfort, or sleep. And if you feel like sharing your thoughts, leaving a comment is always welcome, whether you stayed awake through the entire story or drifted off somewhere along the way. As this journey begins, take a moment to get comfortable. Adjust your position, lower the volume if needed. Let your shoulders relax and your breathing slow. There is nothing you need to do and nowhere you need to go. Allow this long, gentle exploration of Alaska's history to unfold naturally. Let the past move quietly around you. Let the present soften, and let rest arrive whenever it chooses. Sweet dreams, and thank you for spending this peaceful time with Past to Sleep. Number 1. The ancient natural world of Alaska. Long before there were names, borders, or stories told in words, the land that would one day be known as Alaska existed in a state of deep, unbroken quiet. Time moved differently here. It did not hurry. It did not measure itself in years or generations, but in ice, stone, water, and wind. This was a place shaped slowly, patiently, over spans of time so vast that they resist imagination. The foundation of this land was formed through immense geological forces. Far beneath the surface, pressure and heat shifted the earth, lifting mountains upward over millions of years. These mountains did not rise suddenly. They emerged gradually, layer by layer, shaped by movement deep within the planet. Some grew sharp and towering, others rounded and worn, softened by time. Together, they created a vast and uneven landscape that stretched across the horizon, defining space long before anyone tried to cross it. Ice played a central role in shaping this ancient world. Massive glaciers advanced and retreated repeatedly, covering valleys, carving fjords, and reshaping the land beneath their weight. These glaciers moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, yet their influence was powerful. As they pressed forward, they smoothed rock, redirected rivers, and carried stone across great distances. When they melted, they left behind fertile ground, deep valleys, and waterways that would continue to flow long after the ice was gone. Water followed the paths carved by ice. Rivers formed and reformed, adjusting gently to the land's contours. Some flowed calmly across wide plains, while others cut narrow routes through rock and mountain. Lakes gathered where ice once rested, reflecting sky and light in stillness. Along the coast, the ocean met the land in complex patterns, creating inlets, islands, and long stretches of rugged shoreline. The meeting of land and sea was not fixed. It shifted with tides, seasons, and slow geological change. The climate of this ancient world was shaped by its position on the planet and by the movement of air and water. Long winters brought deep cold and extended darkness. Summers offered light that lingered late into the day, warming the land just enough to support life. These cycles repeated endlessly, teaching balance through contrast. Rest and activity, darkness and light, stillness and motion all existed in careful rhythm. Plant life adapted patiently to these conditions. In some regions, forests slowly established themselves, trees growing tall where soil and climate allowed. In others, tundra spread wide, covered in low-growing plants that hugged the ground, conserving warmth and energy. Mosses, grasses, and hardy shrubs thrived where larger plants could not. Growth here was never hurried. It followed the pace set by temperature, sunlight, and season. Animal life moved through this landscape with quiet awareness. Large animals traveled across open spaces, guided by instinct and memory. Smaller creatures adapted to burrow, migrate, or remain still through harsh periods. Birds followed long seasonal routes, arriving and departing in harmony with the changing year. Life existed not in abundance everywhere, but in balance, each form shaped by the demands of its environment. Sound in this ancient world was sparse and gentle. Wind moved across ice and water. Snow fell softly, ice shifted and cracked under pressure. Animal calls carried across distance, then faded into silence. There was no constant noise, no human-made rhythm. Silence was not empty here, it was full, layered with subtle movement and presence. Light behaved differently in this land. During certain seasons, the sun remained low, casting long shadows and soft color across the terrain. At other times, darkness stretched for hours, allowing stars and moonlight to dominate the sky. These extremes were not disruptive. They were expected, woven into the land's identity. Life adapted rather than resisted. The land did not exist to be used or shaped. It simply existed, complete in its own form. Mountains did not seek to be crossed. Rivers did not seek to be followed. Ice did not seek to retreat. Everything moved according to its own internal rhythm, responding only to natural forces and the slow passage of time. As centuries passed into millennia, this ancient world remained largely unchanged. Ice advanced and withdrew. Rivers shifted slightly. Forests expanded and contracted. Yet the overall balance endured. The land was resilient, not because it resisted change, but because it accepted it slowly and completely. This was Alaska before memory, before history, before human presence left any lasting mark, a land defined by patience rather than urgency, a place where time unfolded gently, without witness, without record, and without need for explanation. As you imagine this earliest chapter, Picture vast stretches of open land beneath wide skies. Feel the cold air resting quietly. Hear only wind, water, and distant movement. Let your thoughts slow to match the pace of the landscape itself. This was the ancient natural world. Before footsteps, before voices, before story. A land shaped by ice and time, resting in deep balance, waiting calmly as countless years passed by in silence. As time continued its slow, patient movement across the land, the ancient world of Alaska remained guided by forces that did not hurry and did not pause. Change happened so gradually that it felt almost invisible, unfolding over thousands of years without leaving sharp edges behind. The land learned how to transform without losing balance, and this ability became its quiet strength. The great glaciers continued their long journeys, advancing during colder ages and retreating when the climate softened. Their movement was steady and deliberate, pressing into valleys, shaping coastlines, and sculpting mountainsides. As they shifted, they created deep fjords along the coast, where the sea would later move gently between towering rock walls. These fjords became pathways for water and light, places where ocean and land met in silence. When glaciers melted, they released vast amounts of water that flowed into rivers and lakes. These waters carried minerals and soil, nourishing the land wherever they passed. Over time, river systems became more defined, following paths carved by ice and stone. Some rivers wandered slowly across wide plains, while others rushed through narrow mountain passes, their movement guided by gravity and terrain rather than intention. The coastline remained in constant conversation with the ocean. Tides rose and fell with dependable rhythm, reshaping beaches and inlets grain by grain. Storms arrived and passed, sometimes altering the shoreline slightly, sometimes leaving it unchanged. Islands formed where mountain peaks once stood beneath ice, separated gradually as sea levels shifted. These islands became quiet extensions of the land, shaped by wind, salt, and time. Far inland, the tundra stretched wide and open. This landscape did not appear empty, though it seemed sparse. Life existed here in subtle forms, close to the ground, conserving warmth and energy. Plants grew slowly, often taking years to reach maturity. Their roots spread shallow but wide, drawing strength from cooperation rather than depth. In summer, the tundra briefly came alive with color and movement. In winter, it rested beneath snow and silence. Forests expanded and retreated depending on climate and elevation. In areas where conditions allowed, trees grew tall and steady, forming vast stretches of boreal forest. These forests moved gradually northward during warmer periods and withdrew during colder ones. This movement was not sudden or dramatic. It happened tree by tree, generation by generation, following the slow shifts of temperature and light. Animal life adapted continually to these changes. Large mammals followed migration routes shaped by memory and instinct, moving between seasonal feeding grounds. Smaller animals developed strategies to survive long winters, whether by hibernation, migration, or stillness. Birds arrived each year as the land warmed, filling the air briefly with sound before departing again as cold returned. Life here was defined not by abundance but by endurance. Predator and prey existed in quiet balance. No species dominated the land entirely. Each depended on the other, shaping behavior through presence rather than conflict. This balance prevented excess and ensured that life continued without exhausting its environment. Survival was not aggressive, it was attentive. The sky above Alaska played an important role in shaping this ancient world. Clouds moved slowly across vast distances. Light shifted dramatically with the seasons, sometimes lingering for long days, sometimes disappearing for extended nights. These changes influenced plant growth, animal movement, and the rhythm of the land itself. Darkness was not feared here. It was part of the cycle, offering rest and stillness. Sound remained minimal and meaningful. Wind passed over open land. Ice cracked softly under pressure. Water moved beneath frozen surfaces. Occasional animal calls traveled far before dissolving into silence. There was no constant background noise, no interruption to the land's natural rhythm. Silence allowed awareness to stretch wide. The land itself seemed to breathe slowly. During warmer periods, life expanded gently. During colder ones, it withdrew inward. This breathing continued endlessly, teaching patience through repetition. Nothing was wasted, nothing was rushed. Erosion shaped the mountains gradually. Wind, water, and ice softened sharp edges, rounding peaks and deepening valleys. Stone moved not through force, but through persistence. Even the tallest mountains carried signs of this slow shaping, their surfaces marked by countless years of weather and time. Despite constant change, the land maintained coherence. Rivers did not lose their way. Forests returned after retreat. Tundra regenerated after hardship. The environment was not fragile. It was resilient through adaptability. Change did not break it, it refined it. This ancient world existed without memory or record. There were no witnesses to mark its transitions, no stories told of its formation. Yet the land itself held memory in layers of stone, ice, and soil. Every mountain, river, and coastline carried evidence of what had come before, even if nothing was written or spoken. As centuries turned into millennia, this balance continued uninterrupted. The land did not anticipate arrival. It did not prepare for use. It simply existed, complete and self-sustaining, guided by rhythms far older than history. As you imagine this stage of the land's story, picture long winters beneath star-filled skies, summers where light lingers softly over open plains, rivers flowing steadily through valleys shaped by ice. Feel the calm of a place that does not hurry and does not resist. This was Alaska continuing its ancient life, not changing quickly, not standing still. A land shaped by patience, moving quietly through time, holding its balance gently as the ages passed, unaware that one day footsteps would arrive and stories would begin to form where silence had always been enough. As time continued its slow and unbroken passage, the ancient natural world of Alaska entered a phase defined not by dramatic transformation, but by deep stability. The land had learned how to change without disruption, how to adapt without losing its core balance. Ice, water, wind, and stone worked together quietly, each shaping the land in subtle ways that unfolded across thousands of years. The great glaciers, which had once covered vast regions, now moved in longer, calmer cycles. Their advance and retreat became part of the land's long memory. As they receded, they left behind wide valleys filled with fine sediment, creating ground capable of supporting new life. These valleys did not change suddenly. They evolved slowly, allowing rivers to settle into steady paths and lakes to form where ice had once rested. Water became the primary storyteller of the land. Rivers followed familiar routes, adjusting gently when seasons demanded it. In spring and summer, meltwater flowed freely, feeding wetlands and nourishing plant life. In winter, rivers slowed beneath ice, continuing their journey unseen. These waterways connected distant parts of the land, creating a quiet network that supported life without effort or intention. Along the coast, the relationship between land and sea deepened. Tides rose and fell in endless repetition, shaping shorelines grain by grain. Salt water met fresh water in calm estuaries, creating environments rich in movement and life. Coastal fog rolled in softly, blurring boundaries between water and sky. Storms came and went, sometimes reshaping small sections of coast, sometimes leaving everything unchanged. The tundra continued to stretch wide across the northern regions, a landscape defined by resilience rather than emptiness. Life here adapted to extremes without resistance. Plants grew low and close to the ground, conserving warmth and energy. Growth was slow, measured in years rather than seasons. When conditions allowed, the tundra briefly burst into color, then returned to rest beneath snow. Forests maintained their quiet expansion and retreat, responding to subtle shifts in temperature and light. Trees grew tall where soil permitted, forming dense stands that moved gradually over generations. Fallen trees returned nutrients to the ground, supporting new growth. Nothing was wasted. Every stage of life fed the next, maintaining continuity without intervention. Animal life followed ancient patterns shaped by instinct and memory. Migration routes remained consistent across generations. Herds moved calmly across open land, guided by seasonal change rather than urgency. Predators followed these movements with awareness rather than aggression. Smaller animals adapted through stillness, burrowing, or retreat. Survival was never hurried, it was attentive and deliberate. Birds continued their long journeys, arriving during brief seasons of abundance and departing before hardship returned. Their presence added gentle sound and movement to the landscape, then faded again into silence. These cycles repeated endlessly, reinforcing the land's rhythm rather than disrupting it. The sky remained a powerful influence. Long days of light allowed growth to unfold slowly but fully. Extended nights offered rest and stillness. The aurora moved quietly across dark skies, adding soft color and motion without sound. These natural displays did not seek attention. They simply occurred, part of the land's quiet expression. Sound throughout this world remained minimal and meaningful. Wind moved across open spaces. Snow fell softly. Ice shifted beneath pressure. Water flowed steadily, sometimes hidden, sometimes visible. Silence was common and comfortable, filled with subtle awareness rather than absence. The mountains continued their gradual transformation. Sharp edges softened. Valleys deepened slightly. Stone moved grain by grain, shaped by weather rather than force. These changes were not visible within a lifetime. They belonged to the scale of deep time, unfolding beyond observation. Despite constant motion, the land maintained harmony. No single element dominated. Ice did not overwhelm water. Forest did not erase tundra. Mountain did not suppress valley. Each part existed in relationship with the others, maintaining balance through cooperation rather than control. There was no concept of ownership here. No boundaries marked on land or water. Space belonged to movement, season, and time. The land was shared by all forms of life without division or hierarchy. This openness allowed balance to endure. Memory existed not in stories, but in layers, in rock strata, in ice cores, in soil carried by rivers. Every change left a trace, even if nothing recorded it. The land remembered itself quietly, holding its past within its present form. This ancient world did not anticipate the future. It did not prepare for arrival or use. It existed fully in its own moment, complete and self-sustaining. Change did not threaten it because change was part of its nature. As millennia passed, Alaska remained largely as it had always been, vast, patient, and deeply balanced. It carried its history silently, written into stone and ice rather than words. As you imagine this final stage of the ancient natural world, picture endless horizons beneath wide skies, rivers moving steadily through open land, mountains resting in quiet strength, light and darkness sharing time evenly. This was Alaska before footsteps, before memory became story, before history began to speak. A land shaped by deep time, resting in calm continuity, carrying its silence gently forward as the ages passed, unaware that one day human presence would arrive to listen, to observe, and to become part of the story that had always been unfolding. Number 2, the first peoples and early indigenous life of Alaska. As the ancient natural world of Alaska continued its slow and balanced rhythm, the first human presence began to emerge gently within it. This arrival did not interrupt the land. It blended into it. People did not come to change Alaska, but to live within its existing patterns, learning its pace, its limits, and its quiet strength. Human life here developed slowly, guided by observation rather than control. The earliest peoples arrived over vast stretches of time, moving carefully across land and ice as conditions allowed. Their journeys were not rushed. Movement followed food, climate, and season. When the land opened paths, people followed. When it closed them, people waited. This patience defined early life in Alaska and shaped a deep respect for balance. These early communities learned the land intimately. They understood the rhythm of light and darkness, the return of animals, the freezing and thawing of water. Knowledge was not written. It was remembered, practiced, and shared through daily life. Survival depended on attention, watching weather, listening to animals, and responding gently to change. Daily life followed the seasons. During warmer months, movement increased. People traveled to fishing grounds, hunting areas, and gathering sites. Camps formed near rivers, coastlines, and open land where resources were available. When winter approached, movement slowed. Communities gathered in more sheltered areas, conserving energy and preparing for long periods of stillness. Food was gathered with care. Fishing played a central role along rivers and coasts where salmon and other fish returned reliably each year. Hunting followed migration routes shaped by generations of observation. Plants were gathered during brief seasons of abundance. Nothing was wasted. Every part of what was taken was used, shared, or returned to the land. Shelter reflected understanding rather than permanence. Homes were built from materials the land offered: wood, earth, bone, and hide. These structures provided warmth and protection without dominating the landscape. They were designed to be repaired, adapted, or left behind when movement became necessary. The land was never forced to hold what no longer belonged. Clothing was shaped by necessity and environment. Animal skins and natural fibers provided warmth and flexibility. Design followed function, refined over generations. Every detail reflected experience: how to stay warm without restriction, how to move easily across snow, ice, and water. Community life was deeply connected. Cooperation ensured survival. Knowledge was shared openly, passed from elders to younger generations through demonstration and repetition. Stories carried memory, teaching not only history but behavior: how to respect animals, how to read the land, how to live without excess. Spiritual life was inseparable from daily experience. The land was not viewed as separate from people. Animals, water, weather, and earth were understood as living forces deserving respect. Rituals and practices honored these relationships, reinforcing balance rather than dominance. Nothing was owned. Everything was shared through responsibility. Movement across the land followed natural routes. Rivers guided travel, coastlines offered passage. Snow and ice opened paths during winter that did not exist in warmer seasons. These routes were known through memory rather than maps, adjusted each year as conditions changed. Sound in this world remained gentle. Conversation was quiet. Activity followed need rather than schedule. Silence was familiar and meaningful. It allowed awareness to remain wide, helping people sense change before it arrived. Time was not measured in numbers. It was felt through seasons, events, and cycles. Life unfolded without urgency. Preparation mattered more than speed. Patience ensured continuity. As generations passed, cultures developed distinct identities shaped by region and environment. Coastal peoples lived differently from those inland. Arctic communities adapted differently than those in forests or river valleys. Yet all shared a common understanding: survival came from cooperation with the land, not control over it. Conflict was rare and limited. Resources were managed through tradition and understanding. Balance mattered more than accumulation. Excess was discouraged because it threatened stability. As you imagine this earliest human chapter, picture small communities moving calmly through vast landscapes, canoes gliding across quiet water, fires burning softly against cold air, voices low, purposeful, and calm, the land vast and patient around them. This was human life entering Alaska gently, not as conqueror, not as master, but as participant, a way of living shaped by listening, observing, and adapting, allowing people to become part of the land's long rhythm, adding human memory to a place already rich with time, silence, and balance. As generations passed, Indigenous life in Alaska continued to deepen, shaped by experience layered gently upon experience. Knowledge accumulated not through sudden discovery, but through careful observation repeated across lifetimes. Every season added understanding. Every year refined skill. Life here did not separate learning from living. To live was to learn, and to learn was to survive. Communities developed rhythms that mirrored the land's own cycles. Coastal peoples aligned their lives with the ocean's steady patterns, watching tides, currents, and the seasonal return of marine life. Inland communities followed rivers and forests, guided by the migration of animals and the growth of plants. Arctic peoples adapted to long winters and open ice, learning to move across frozen landscapes with confidence and care. Each way of life emerged naturally from place rather than preference. Travel remained essential. Movement allowed balance to be maintained, preventing any one area from being overused. Canoes, sleds, and careful foot travel followed routes shaped by memory rather than design. These paths shifted from year to year, responding to weather, ice, and water. Flexibility mattered more than permanence. Knowing when not to travel was as important as knowing when to move. Food systems reflected deep respect for the land. Hunting and fishing followed strict traditions that ensured sustainability. Animals were taken with care, never wasted, and always honored. Fishing seasons were observed carefully, allowing populations to renew themselves. Plants were gathered selectively, leaving enough to grow again. This balance was not enforced through rule, but through shared understanding passed down through stories and practice. Storage and preparation played an important role. Food was dried, smoked, frozen, or preserved in ways that extended nourishment through long winters. These methods were refined over centuries, shaped by climate and necessity. Preparation was calm and methodical, done with patience rather than urgency. Winter was not feared, it was expected. Homes evolved to meet environmental needs. Coastal dwellings were shaped to withstand wind and moisture. Inland shelters offered insulation and warmth. Arctic homes were built low and sturdy, conserving heat and resisting cold. Each structure reflected careful understanding of local conditions. Homes were not meant to impress, they were meant to protect. Family and community structures supported cooperation. Elders held knowledge and guided decisions. Children learned through observation, gradually taking on responsibility. Everyone had a role, though roles were flexible, adapting to need and circumstance. Respect flowed through experience rather than authority. Spiritual life remained woven into daily routine. The natural world was not separate from human life. Animals, weather, and land were understood as living presences deserving acknowledgement. Rituals and ceremonies reinforced gratitude, balance, and humility. These practices did not seek control, they sought harmony. Artistic expression existed quietly within everyday life. Tools, clothing, and shelters were often decorated with patterns and symbols that carried meaning. These designs reflected environment, story, and identity. Art was not separate from function, it enhanced it, adding beauty without excess. Language played a central role in preserving knowledge. Words carried precise meaning, shaped by environment and experience. Stories taught lessons about behavior, respect, and survival. Oral tradition ensured that memory remained alive, adaptable, and responsive to change. History was not fixed. It lived through retelling. Conflict remained limited and resolved through custom rather than force. Shared understanding reduced competition. When disagreements occurred, they were addressed through dialogue and tradition. The goal was restoration of balance, not victory. Time continued to be measured through experience rather than numbers. Years were remembered by events, hard winters, abundant seasons, notable journeys. This approach kept attention focused on present conditions rather than abstract timelines. As outside influences remained distant, indigenous life in Alaska continued largely uninterrupted. The land and its people existed together in long-standing relationship. Change occurred slowly, absorbed gently rather than imposed. As you imagine this phase, picture a winter gathering inside a warm shelter, soft light reflecting on carved tools, quiet voices sharing stories. Outside, wind moving across snow. Inside, calm and continuity. This was a way of life refined through patience, through listening, through time. Indigenous communities of Alaska did not seek to dominate their environment. They learned how to belong to it. And through that belonging, they created cultures of resilience, balance, and quiet strength. Cultures that would endure long after new influences arrived, carrying ancient knowledge forward into an uncertain future with calm confidence and deep-rooted wisdom. As time continued its gentle flow, indigenous life in Alaska reached a depth shaped by countless generations of lived experience. What had begun as careful adaptation became refined wisdom. Knowledge no longer belonged to individuals alone. It belonged to the community, carried collectively through memory, story, and daily practice. Life here was not static, but it was steady, shaped by continuity rather than disruption. Communities developed an intimate awareness of long-term patterns. Elders remembered cycles that spanned decades, recalling seasons of abundance and years of scarcity. These memories informed decisions, guiding when to move, when to stay, and when to prepare more carefully. This long view of time allowed balance to be preserved, even when conditions shifted unexpectedly. Children grew into responsibility gradually. Learning happened through observation rather than instruction alone. Young people watched how tools were made, how food was prepared, how shelters were repaired. Skills were practiced repeatedly, refined over time. Mistakes were part of learning, corrected gently rather than punished. This approach created confidence without haste. Social bonds strengthened through shared labor. Fishing, hunting, building, and preparation were often communal activities. Working together reduced risk and reinforced trust. No one stood apart from the group for long. Cooperation was not optional. It was the foundation of survival. Through this cooperation, relationships deepened naturally. Seasonal movement continued to shape life. Spring brought renewed activity as ice loosened and waterways opened. Summer allowed travel, trade between groups, and gathering of resources. Autumn focused on preparation, preservation, and storage. Winter brought stillness, storytelling, and reflection. Each season had purpose. None was rushed. Trade existed between communities, extending networks of connection across vast distances. Goods, tools, materials, and stories moved slowly along known routes. These exchanges strengthened relationships and shared knowledge. Trade was based on trust rather than accumulation. Its purpose was balance, not expansion. Health and healing were approached holistically. Physical well-being was inseparable from mental and spiritual balance. Healing practices combined practical knowledge of plants and techniques with ceremony and community support. Illness was not viewed as isolated. It was understood within the larger context of life and environment. Decision-making followed tradition and consensus. Leaders emerged through experience and respect rather than authority. Guidance was offered calmly, often indirectly, allowing individuals to reach understanding themselves. This approach maintained harmony and prevented division. Despite the vastness of the land, people did not feel isolated. Connection existed through shared knowledge, seasonal meetings, and oral tradition. Stories traveled farther than people, carrying memory across generations and landscapes. Through story, the past remained present, adaptable, and alive. The relationship with animals remained deeply respectful. Animals were not viewed solely as resources, but as participants in shared existence. Rituals honored their sacrifice. Gratitude was expressed through care and restraint. This respect ensured that hunting remained sustainable and spiritually grounded. Art and craftsmanship continued to evolve quietly. Carvings, textiles, and tools reflected regional identity and environmental understanding. Patterns carried meaning, maps of memory, symbols of protection, reminders of relationship. Beauty existed not for display, but for connection. Despite occasional hardship, fear did not define life. Preparation and knowledge reduced uncertainty. Even during difficult winters or poor seasons, communities relied on shared resources and memory. Hardship was met with patience rather than panic. This way of life endured for thousands of years, adapting subtly as climate and conditions shifted. It did not remain unchanged, but it remained balanced. The land and its people continued to shape one another through quiet exchange. As you imagine this final phase of early indigenous life, picture a calm winter evening. Snow resting heavily outside. Inside, a warm shelter lit softly by fire. Elders speaking slowly, children listening, tools resting nearby, ready for use, time moving gently, unmeasured. This was life shaped by belonging, by memory, by patience. Long before outside influence arrived, indigenous peoples of Alaska had developed cultures of deep resilience and understanding. Their knowledge was not written in books, but in movement, story, and care for the land. And as time continued forward, this wisdom remained, rooted deeply in place, ready to persist, adapt, and endure through the changes that would eventually arrive, carrying the ancient rhythm of Alaska within it. Number 3. Early exploration and distant contact of Alaska. As indigenous life in Alaska continued in its steady rhythm, shaped by patience and deep understanding of the land, distant changes were quietly unfolding beyond the horizon. Far away, in places unknown to the people of this northern world, curiosity about the edges of the map was beginning to grow. This curiosity did not arrive suddenly or forcefully in Alaska. It approached slowly, carried by rumors, fragments of stories, and eventually unfamiliar movement along distant waters. For thousands of years, Alaska had existed largely apart from the rest of the world, connected only through natural migration routes and indigenous networks of trade and communication. The land remained vast, quiet, and self-contained. Its people did not seek outside contact, nor did they anticipate it. Life was already complete, guided by cycles that had proven reliable across generations. The first hints of distant contact came not through dramatic encounters, but through subtle signs. Unfamiliar objects appeared through extended trade networks. Materials that did not originate locally moved slowly from hand to hand, carried across long distances over many years. These items were rare and curious, but they did not disrupt daily life. They were absorbed into existing systems of value and use without urgency. Exploration from distant regions was driven by very different motivations. Far to the west, explorers began to look toward northern waters with interests shaped by trade, mapping, and expansion. These journeys were uncertain and dangerous, guided by incomplete knowledge and ambition rather than familiarity. The vast northern seas did not welcome movement easily. Weather shifted quickly, ice blocked passage. Navigation was slow and imprecise. When explorers eventually approached the edges of Alaska's coastline, they did so cautiously. The land they encountered felt immense and unfamiliar. Mountains rose sharply from the sea. Fog obscured distance. The scale of the environment dwarfed human presence, reminding newcomers that this was not a place easily claimed or controlled. Early encounters were limited and often indirect. Ships remained offshore. Explorers observed coastlines, mapped inlets, and noted landmarks without fully understanding their significance. Contact with indigenous communities was sporadic and tentative. Communication relied on gesture, patience, and mutual observation rather than shared language. For indigenous peoples, these early encounters were moments of curiosity rather than alarm. Outsiders appeared briefly, then disappeared again. Their presence did not yet threaten established ways of life. The land remained dominant, seasonal routines continued uninterrupted. Exploration, at this stage, passed through Alaska lightly, leaving little trace. The environment itself acted as a barrier to deeper intrusion. Harsh weather, long distances, and limited resources prevented prolonged presence. Explorers were visitors rather than settlers, dependent on their ships and supplies. Without indigenous knowledge, survival inland was nearly impossible. This limitation kept contact brief and cautious. Stories of these encounters traveled slowly among indigenous communities. They were shared without urgency, folded into existing oral traditions. Outsiders were noted as part of the wider world, not as immediate change. The land had seen many changes before. This too was observed patiently. From the perspective of distant explorers, Alaska remained mysterious and incomplete. Maps were vague. Coastlines were sketched imperfectly. Rivers, mountains, and interior lands remained largely unknown. The vastness of the region resisted simple understanding. Each journey added fragments rather than clarity. Exploration continued gradually, often separated by long periods of absence. Ships returned to familiar waters elsewhere. Alaska remained at the edge of attention rather than its center. This distance preserved the land's quiet balance for many more years. As you imagine this early stage of distant contact, picture large wooden ships moving slowly through cold waters, fog rolling across the sea, mountains rising silently in the distance. On shore, life continuing calmly, unchanged by brief appearances beyond the horizon. This was the beginning of awareness, not transformation. The first distant glance, not arrival. Alaska remained what it had always been, vast, patient, and self-possessed, while the outside world slowly learned of its existence. Exploration touched the edges of this land lightly, without yet altering its rhythm, as time continued to move forward at the same calm pace it always had. As the years passed, distant contact with Alaska slowly became more frequent, though it remained cautious and incomplete. The land did not suddenly open itself to the outside world. Instead, it revealed itself in fragments, offering glimpses rather than understanding. Exploration during this period was shaped as much by limitation as by curiosity. The vast northern environment set the pace, reminding all who approached that movement here would always be slow. Explorers who returned to Alaskan waters carried with them partial knowledge from earlier journeys. Coastlines had been noted, certain landmarks remembered, but much remained uncertain. Fog, ice, and unpredictable weather erased clear lines of travel. What had been mapped one season often looked different the next. The land resisted being reduced to fixed shapes on paper. Ships approached the coast carefully, anchoring only where conditions allowed. Crews observed from a distance, noting the shape of mountains, the opening of bays, and the movement of tides. Inland travel remained rare. Without familiarity or guidance, the interior was difficult to access. Dense forests, wetlands, and rugged terrain discouraged prolonged exploration beyond the shoreline. Contact with indigenous communities increased slightly, though it remained limited. Meetings were brief and tentative, shaped by mutual caution rather than conflict. Neither side fully understood the other's intentions. Exchanges were minimal, sometimes gestures, sometimes small trades. These interactions were quiet, lacking urgency or confrontation. For indigenous peoples, the presence of outsiders was noted but not yet disruptive. Life continued according to established rhythms. Seasonal movement, hunting, fishing, and gathering remained unchanged. Outsiders appeared briefly, then departed again, leaving behind no permanent mark. The land absorbed their presence without consequence. Explorers often depended on indigenous knowledge without fully realizing it. They observed routes taken by local people, learned where water was accessible, and noted patterns of movement. Yet much of this understanding remained superficial. Without deep connection to the land, survival inland was temporary at best. Navigation during this time was uncertain. Instruments were limited, and weather conditions frequently obscured visibility. Ice flows shifted unpredictably, blocking paths that had seemed open only days before. Storms forced ships to retreat, reinforcing the sense that Alaska was not easily entered or claimed. Maps slowly improved, though they remained incomplete. Coastlines became more recognizable, but interior regions were still largely blank. Rivers were guessed at rather than followed. Mountains were drawn as symbols rather than understood as landscapes. Alaska existed more as an idea than a known place in the minds of distant explorers. Motivations for exploration varied. Some sought trade routes, others sought knowledge, and some simply followed instruction from distant authorities. Yet none moved with certainty. The land demanded humility. Progress was measured in survival rather than success. The environment continued to act as a protective presence. Long winters limited travel. Short summers required careful planning. Supplies were difficult to replenish. These challenges ensured that exploration remained episodic rather than continuous. Information about Alaska traveled slowly to the outside world. Stories were shared through reports and rumor, often exaggerated or misunderstood. The land was described as harsh, distant, and vast. These descriptions discouraged rapid movement or settlement, preserving Alaska's isolation for longer. As time passed, awareness of Alaska increased, but intimacy did not. The land remained more observed than entered. Indigenous life continued uninterrupted, shaped by traditions far older than the newcomer's curiosity. As you imagine this stage, picture ships appearing on the horizon, then fading again into mist. Small exchanges on quiet shores, the land unchanged, vast and calm, watching without reaction. This period was defined by distance, by hesitation, by incomplete understanding. Exploration touched Alaska lightly, leaving its deeper rhythms intact. The land remained dominant, guiding interaction through restraint rather than resistance. And so, while awareness slowly expanded beyond the horizon, Alaska itself continued its ancient life, steady and patient, waiting quietly as distant attention gradually turned more focused, though still unsure of how to proceed. As distant contact with Alaska continued to unfold, it entered a stage marked not by dramatic arrival, but by growing familiarity paired with ongoing uncertainty. The land was no longer entirely unknown to the outside world, yet it remained deeply misunderstood. Exploration during this period did not move forward with confidence. It moved carefully, shaped by hesitation, distance, and the quiet power of the environment itself. Repeated voyages slowly reduced the sense of mystery surrounding Alaska's coastline. Certain bays, islands, and passages became recognizable through experience rather than maps alone. Sailors learned which waters were calmer, which coastlines offered shelter, and which regions demanded caution. Even so, every journey still felt provisional. Conditions changed quickly, and familiarity never fully replaced risk. The interior of Alaska remained largely untouched by outside exploration. Dense forests, vast tundra, mountain ranges and river systems formed natural barriers that discouraged inland movement. Without indigenous guidance, these landscapes were difficult to read. Paths were not obvious, resources were not easily located. The land did not reveal itself willingly to those unfamiliar with its rhythms. Encounters between explorers and indigenous communities became slightly more frequent, though they remained cautious and brief. Meetings often took place near shorelines or river mouths, spaces where movement was already familiar. Communication relied on gesture, tone, and patience. Misunderstandings were common, but hostility was rare at this stage. Each side observed the other carefully, without immediate judgment. For indigenous peoples, these encounters were absorbed into existing understanding of the world. Outsiders were seen as visitors from distant places, not as immediate threats. Their tools, clothing, and vessels were unfamiliar, but not alarming. Life continued as it always had, shaped by seasonal movement and shared knowledge rather than external presence. Trade began to develop in small, informal ways. Simple exchanges occurred, objects traded for food, guidance, or materials. These interactions were practical rather than strategic. They did not yet reshape indigenous economies or social structures. Trade existed as an extension of hospitality and curiosity, not as a system of control. From the perspective of explorers, Alaska remained challenging. Weather continued to dominate planning. Ice limited movement, supplies ran low quickly. Long distances separated Alaska from established ports, making return journeys uncertain. These factors prevented sustained presence and discouraged settlement. Reports sent back to distant lands reflected this uncertainty. Alaska was described as vast, cold, and difficult. Its resources were not yet clearly understood. While curiosity remained, enthusiasm was tempered by caution. The land did not promise easy reward. Navigation tools improved slowly, but they could not overcome environmental unpredictability. Fog obscured coastlines. Storms arrived suddenly. Ice shifted without warning. These conditions reinforced the sense that Alaska required respect rather than confidence. Maps gradually gained detail along the coast, but large areas remained blank. Rivers were marked where mouths were visible, but their courses inland were unknown. Mountains were drawn as symbols rather than landscapes. Alaska continued to exist at the edge of understanding, more outlined than known. This period of exploration did not bring rapid change to indigenous life. Traditional patterns remained intact. Knowledge continued to pass through generations uninterrupted. Seasonal cycles continued to guide movement and preparation. The land remained central, unchanged by distant attention. Exploration during this phase was more about observation than possession. Outsiders learned that Alaska could not be approached quickly or reshaped easily. The environment insisted on patience. Progress required humility. As you imagine this stage, picture a coastline familiar but still vast, ships anchoring briefly, then departing. Quiet exchanges on shore, the land unchanged, steady and watchful. This was the final stage of distant contact before deeper involvement began. A moment of awareness without commitment. A pause before transformation. Alaska remained largely its own world, vast, resilient, and guided by rhythms far older than exploration. The outside world had noticed it, mapped parts of it, and touched its edges. Yet the heart of the land remained untouched, its balance intact, as time continued to move forward slowly, calmly, and without urgency, preparing quietly for the changes that would eventually arrive. Number 4. Russian America and the fur trade era Alaska. As distant exploration gradually shifted into sustained interest, Alaska entered a new and quieter phase of contact, one defined not by curiosity alone, but by purpose. This purpose did not arrive suddenly, nor did it announce itself loudly. It emerged slowly, carried across cold waters by traders and ships whose intentions were shaped by commerce rather than discovery. In this era, Alaska did not yet become crowded or transformed. Instead, it experienced a subtle change in rhythm, as outside presence lingered longer than before. The fur trade became the primary reason for extended contact. Far beyond Alaska, animal pelts, especially those prized for warmth and durability, were in demand. The northern regions were known, even from a distance, to hold animals whose fur could withstand extreme cold. This knowledge drew traders steadily northward, not to settle, but to extract and move resources across vast distances. Early trading efforts were tentative. Traders relied heavily on coastal access, remaining close to the sea where ships could anchor and retreat if conditions changed. The interior of Alaska remained largely inaccessible to outsiders, protected by terrain, weather, and the absence of familiar routes. This limitation shaped the character of early trade. It was coastal, cautious, and dependent on indigenous knowledge. Russian traders became the most sustained outside presence during this period. Their arrival did not immediately overwhelm indigenous life. Instead, it layered new activity onto existing systems. Trade developed gradually through exchange rather than force. Indigenous communities already understood the value of animal pelts and had long-established hunting traditions. What changed was destination, not practice. Hunting patterns began to adjust slowly. Some animals were taken more frequently, especially those whose fur was most valuable. This shift was not immediate or uniform. In many areas, traditional methods and restraint continued. However, the growing demand introduced pressure that had not existed before. Balance, once maintained through shared understanding, now faced external influence. Trading posts appeared quietly along parts of the coast. These were not cities or towns, but small functional structures designed for storage, shelter, and exchange. They did not dominate the landscape. They adapted to it, built where access was possible, and retreat remained an option. Life within these posts was isolated, shaped by weather, distance, and long periods of waiting. For indigenous communities, interaction with traders was practical rather than transformative at first. Goods were exchanged, metal, tools, fabrics, and other unfamiliar items entered daily life. These items were evaluated based on usefulness rather than novelty. They were integrated slowly, replacing or supplementing existing tools without erasing traditional knowledge. Communication remained limited. Language barriers required patience. Understanding developed through repetition rather than explanation. Relationships were shaped by familiarity over time rather than formal agreement. Trust was fragile but necessary, as survival in such an environment required cooperation. The land itself continued to assert control over the pace of change. Harsh winters limited movement. Storms disrupted supply lines. Long distances made communication slow and uncertain. These factors prevented rapid expansion and ensured that outside influence remained contained. Russian presence did not extend far inland during this early phase. The interior remained largely indigenous controlled, both practically and culturally. Traders depended on local hunters and guides, acknowledging, whether openly or not, that without indigenous knowledge, sustained activity was impossible. Life for traders was often difficult and quiet. Isolation shaped daily routine, supplies were precious, time was measured in seasons rather than schedules. The environment demanded humility, reducing ambition and encouraging patience. Many traders came and went, leaving little trace behind. Spiritual and cultural differences existed, but they did not immediately dominate interaction. Indigenous belief systems remained strong, grounded in relationship with land and animals. Outside religious influence was present but limited in reach during this early stage. Traditions continued largely uninterrupted. As trade expanded slowly, awareness of Alaska grew in distant lands, yet it was still seen as remote, difficult, and demanding. Its value lay not in settlement, but in resource extraction. This perception delayed large-scale population movement and preserved much of Alaska's quiet character. As you imagine this era, picture small ships anchored near rugged shores, modest trading posts standing against wide landscapes, quiet exchanges taking place under open skies. Indigenous communities continuing seasonal routines nearby, unchanged in rhythm if not entirely untouched. This was Alaska's first sustained connection to global systems, not through conquest, not through crowds, but through trade. The fur trade era did not yet transform Alaska completely. It introduced pressure, presence, and possibility, but slowly, carefully, and unevenly. The land remained vast and dominant. Indigenous life remained central, and time continued to move forward at its familiar pace as Alaska entered a new chapter, one shaped by quiet exchange rather than sudden change. As the fur trade era continued, the presence of Russian traders in Alaska became more established, though never overwhelming. This period was defined not by rapid expansion, but by endurance. Life unfolded slowly, shaped by distance, climate, and reliance on indigenous knowledge. Alaska did not transform into a colony in the way other lands had. Instead, it became a network of scattered outposts connected by water, weather, and necessity. Trading activity gradually expanded along the coastline and nearby islands. Sea otter fur in particular became highly valued, drawing increased attention to coastal regions. The pursuit of these animals altered movement patterns, encouraging longer stays and repeated journeys. Yet even as demand grew, the land resisted urgency. Travel remained seasonal. Storms still dictated schedules. Ice still closed routes without warning. Russian traders depended heavily on indigenous hunters, whose skill and knowledge were essential. These hunters understood animal behavior, migration patterns, and sustainable methods developed over generations. While pressure increased to supply more furs, traditional practices often moderated excess, especially in areas where community influence remained strong. Balance was strained, but not immediately broken. Settlements remained small and functional. Buildings were constructed for storage, shelter, and basic administration rather than comfort. Wood was used sparingly. Structures were repaired rather than replaced. These outposts felt temporary even when they lasted for years, shaped by the understanding that permanence in Alaska was uncertain. Life within these settlements was quiet and repetitive. Long periods of isolation were common. Supplies arrived irregularly, sometimes delayed by months. During winter, activity slowed to a near standstill. People learned to wait. Wait for ships, wait for weather, wait for light. Time here moved differently, reinforcing patience rather than ambition. Cultural exchange deepened gradually. Indigenous communities adapted certain tools and materials introduced through trade, incorporating them into daily life were useful. Metal implements, for example, replaced or supplemented traditional tools. Yet these changes did not erase existing knowledge. They layered onto it, creating hybrid practices shaped by practicality rather than pressure. Religious influence expanded slowly but unevenly. Some Russian Orthodox traditions were introduced, often through ritual and symbol rather than direct instruction. In certain communities, elements were accepted and adapted. In others, traditional spiritual practices remained dominant. Belief systems interacted quietly, without immediate displacement. Language barriers persisted, limiting deep communication. Understanding developed through routine interaction rather than formal dialogue. Relationships were shaped by necessity. Trade required cooperation. Survival required mutual tolerance. This practical dependence often softened conflict, even when misunderstandings arose. The environment continued to regulate expansion. Overhunting in some areas reduced animal populations, forcing traders to move or pause activity. This natural response highlighted the limits of extraction. Where balance tipped too far, scarcity followed. The land responded quietly but firmly. Indigenous communities felt these pressures unevenly. Some experienced increased demands on hunting and labor. Others remained largely untouched due to remoteness or limited access. Alaska's vastness prevented uniform change, allowing many regions to continue traditional life with minimal disruption. From the Russian perspective, Alaska remained difficult to manage. Distance from administrative centers created challenges. Communication was slow, oversight was limited. Profit existed, but it came at high cost and risk. This reality prevented large-scale settlement or development. As years passed, the fur trade reached a plateau. Resources were not endless. The environment made this clear through decline and scarcity. This natural limit shaped the future of Russian presence, introducing questions of sustainability and value. As you imagine this stage, picture long winters at isolated trading posts, supplies carefully rationed, Indigenous hunters moving confidently through snow and forest. Ships arriving rarely, bringing both relief and uncertainty. This was an era of persistence rather than growth, of endurance rather than expansion. Russian America existed not as a thriving colony, but as a tenuous extension shaped by Alaska's conditions. The land remained dominant. Indigenous knowledge remained essential, and time continued its slow movement, guiding this era gently toward its eventual conclusion. As the fur trade's quiet influence began to wane and Alaska's future prepared, slowly and quietly, to change once again. As the fur trade era moved toward its later years, Russian America entered a period of quiet decline rather than dramatic collapse. There was no single moment when the era ended. Instead, it slowly faded, shaped by exhaustion, of resources, of distance, and of patience. Alaska remained vast and demanding, and over time it became clear that sustained control from afar required more than trade alone could provide. Animal populations, once abundant along coasts and islands, began to thin noticeably in several regions. Sea otters, so central to the fur trade, became harder to find. Hunting journeys grew longer. Effort increased while return diminished. This change did not arrive suddenly, but its steady progression was impossible to ignore. The land responded naturally to imbalance, restoring itself by limiting excess. As resources declined, trading activity became less predictable. Some posts remained active, while others were abandoned quietly. Buildings fell into disuse, reclaimed slowly by weather and time. Wood softened, roofs collapsed, paths faded. The land absorbed these traces without resistance, returning silence where activity had once existed. Russian administrators faced increasing difficulty managing such a distant territory. Communication with centers of authority remained slow and unreliable. Decisions were delayed. Supplies arrived inconsistently. The cost of maintaining even modest operations grew heavier with each passing year. Alaska, once valuable for its furs, became less profitable and more demanding. Indigenous communities continued to adapt, drawing on resilience refined over generations. Where trade pressure eased, traditional practices regained balance. Hunting adjusted naturally as animal populations recovered in some areas. Cultural life, though touched by outside influence, remained rooted in long-standing knowledge and memory. In regions where Russian presence had been strongest, hybrid communities emerged quietly. Families formed across cultural lines, languages blended, traditions overlapped. These changes did not erase indigenous identity, nor did they fully transplant Russian culture. Instead, they created layered lives shaped by necessity, proximity, and shared experience. Religious influence lingered in some areas, integrated into local practice rather than imposed. Rituals adapted, beliefs coexisted. Spiritual life continued to emphasize relationship with land and community, even as new symbols appeared alongside older ones. The environment continued to dictate daily life. Winters remained long and demanding. Storms isolated settlements. Ice blocked passage. These conditions did not change with administration or trade. They reminded everyone, trader and hunter alike, that Alaska could not be reshaped easily. As Russian interest declined, attention from other distant powers began to increase quietly. Alaska was noticed not only for what it provided, but for where it was. Its position on the map carried strategic significance, even if its interior remained largely unknown. This shift in attention did not immediately alter life on the ground, but it marked the beginning of a new phase of uncertainty. For many living in Alaska at the time, daily life remained familiar. Seasons continued their cycle. Preparation remained essential. Community cooperation remained central. The future, though unclear, did not yet demand change. Life unfolded calmly, as it always had, grounded in routine and patience. The fur trade era left behind subtle marks rather than dramatic scars. Tools, words, beliefs, and relationships lingered. Yet Alaska itself remained largely intact. Its scale, climate, and resilience ensured that no single era could redefine it completely. As Russian America approached its end, it did so quietly. There were no great battles, no sweeping transformations. Instead, there was recognition, from afar and from within, that this land required more than distant management could offer. As you imagine this closing chapter, picture empty trading posts resting under snow, weathered structures standing silently, indigenous communities continuing daily life nearby. The land unchanged in its vastness, holding memory gently. This was the quiet conclusion of Russian America. Not an ending marked by noise, but by fading presence. The fur trade era passed into history slowly, absorbed into the land's long story. Alaska remained patient, steady, and vast, ready, without urgency, to move into the next chapter of its history, guided once again by time, distance, and the enduring strength of the land itself. Number 5. Transfer to the United States and a quiet territory of Alaska. As the era of Russian America slowly faded, Alaska entered a period of quiet uncertainty. The land itself did not change. Mountains remained steady. Rivers continued their patient paths. Indigenous communities followed the same seasonal rhythms that had guided life for generations. Yet beyond Alaska's distant horizons, decisions were being discussed that would gently redirect the course of its human story. For Russia, Alaska had become a distant and difficult responsibility. The fur trade no longer provided the returns it once had. Supplying and managing such a remote territory required time, money, and effort that outweighed its benefits. Communication remained slow. Defense felt uncertain. Gradually, the idea emerged that Alaska might be better released than retained. From the perspective of the United States, Alaska appeared not as a developed land, but as an opportunity defined by space, position, and possibility. Its value was not immediately obvious to everyone. Many viewed it as cold, distant, and impractical. Yet others saw long-term importance in its location and resources, even if those resources were not yet fully understood. The transfer itself was not dramatic within Alaska. There were no sudden changes in daily life, no sweeping movements of people or structures. The agreement was made far away, written on paper rather than shaped by the land. When the decision was finalized, Alaska passed quietly from one distant authority to another, without ceremony that reached its vast interior. For those living in Alaska at the time, the transfer felt distant and abstract. Flags changed, administration shifted, but daily routines remained the same. The land still demanded patience. Weather still dictated movement. Communities continued to prepare for winter, fish in season, and gather where they always had. The United States inherited a territory that was largely unknown to it. Maps were incomplete. Infrastructure was minimal. Population was sparse and scattered. There were no cities in the modern sense, only small settlements, trading posts, and indigenous communities spread across immense distances. Governance, at first, was limited in scope and reach. Alaska became a quiet territory, officially part of a growing nation, yet practically separate in experience. Its remoteness insulated it from rapid change. Laws existed, but enforcement was inconsistent. Oversight was distant. Life continued to be shaped more by environment than by administration. Military presence was minimal during the early territorial years. There was little immediate urgency to develop or defend Alaska extensively. It remained on the edge of national attention, acknowledged but not yet prioritized. This distance allowed Alaska to remain calm and largely undisturbed. Indigenous life continued, though pressures slowly increased. New systems of governance did not always align with traditional structures. Yet change arrived gradually, often filtered through distance and delay. Many communities remained self-reliant, guided by knowledge refined over centuries. Economic activity remained limited. Trade continued at a modest pace. Fishing, hunting, and small-scale commerce supported daily life. There was no rush of settlers, no rapid construction. Alaska did not suddenly become crowded or transformed. Its scale resisted haste. Transportation remained challenging. Travel relied on water routes, seasonal trails, and long journeys through difficult terrain. Communication with the rest of the country took weeks or months. This isolation preserved Alaska's quiet character during these early years as a U.S. territory. Perception of Alaska in the wider United States was mixed. Some questioned the value of its acquisition. Others speculated about hidden potential. For Alaska itself, these opinions mattered little. Life continued according to land and season rather than debate. As time passed, small changes accumulated slowly. New administrative structures formed. American influence became more visible in certain settlements, yet these changes layered onto existing life rather than replacing it. Alaska absorbed them gently, as it had absorbed every influence before. As you imagine this period, picture wide landscapes under calm skies, a distant flag moving in the wind near a small outpost, indigenous communities continuing familiar routines, silence stretching between settlements. This was Alaska as a quiet territory, owned on paper but governed by distance and time. The transfer marked a shift in authority, not in rhythm. Alaska remained vast, patient, and largely untouched, waiting calmly without urgency as the future approached slowly, shaped once again by forces beyond the horizon and by the enduring steadiness of the land itself. As Alaska settled into its new identity, As a territory of the United States, life continued at a pace that felt unchanged on the surface. Yet slowly, quietly, subtle shifts began to take place beneath that calm exterior. The transfer of authority had happened far away, but time allowed its influence to reach Alaska gradually, carried not by urgency, but by routine decisions, small movements, and distant intentions. In the early territorial years, American governance existed mostly in theory rather than practice. Officials were few, resources were limited, and the vast distances between settlements made centralized control nearly impossible. Alaska was too large, too remote, and too demanding to be reshaped quickly. Instead, it remained loosely administered, guided more by circumstance than by structured policy. For many residents, especially indigenous communities, daily life remained rooted in long-standing tradition. Seasonal cycles continued to guide movement, food preparation, and shelter. Rivers still determined travel. Weather still dictated plans. The presence of a new government did not immediately alter these realities. The land remained the strongest influence. Small settlements slowly grew around existing trading posts and coastal hubs. These places did not expand rapidly. Growth was measured, shaped by supply lines and necessity rather than ambition. Buildings were functional, streets were informal. Life remained quiet, often isolated, and deeply connected to the surrounding environment. Communication with the rest of the United States remained slow and irregular. News arrived late. Decisions made elsewhere took months to be felt, if they were felt at all. This delay softened the impact of change. Alaska existed slightly out of sync with national life, following its own rhythm shaped by distance and weather. Economic development was minimal during this period. There was no immediate rush to exploit resources on a large scale. Transportation challenges made large projects difficult. Without railways, roads, or consistent ports, Alaska remained largely inaccessible. What little commerce existed focused on fishing, small-scale trade, and local needs. Fishing grew slowly in importance, especially along coastal areas where access to water made movement easier. This industry developed carefully, often building on existing indigenous knowledge of seasonal patterns and sustainable practices. It did not yet dominate life, but it began to add a modest layer of economic activity. Military presence remained limited. Alaska's strategic value was not yet fully recognized. Defense infrastructure was sparse. The territory remained peaceful, defined more by isolation than by tension. This absence of urgency allowed Alaska to remain quiet, its landscapes undisturbed by large-scale construction. For indigenous peoples, this period was one of gradual adjustment. New legal systems and policies began to appear, sometimes conflicting with traditional governance. Yet enforcement was inconsistent, and many communities continued to live largely according to custom and shared understanding. Change arrived unevenly, affecting some regions more than others. Education, religion, and American cultural influence expanded slowly. Schools and missions appeared in certain areas, introducing new languages and ideas. These institutions often existed alongside traditional practices rather than replacing them entirely. Cultural blending occurred quietly, shaped by proximity and necessity rather than force. The concept of land ownership began to shift during this time. Traditional relationships with land, based on use and stewardship, encountered new legal definitions. These differences created confusion and tension, though often delayed by lack of formal enforcement. The land itself remained unchanged, but its meaning within governance systems began to evolve. Transportation continued to define the limits of growth. Rivers, coastal routes, and seasonal trails remained primary paths. Overland travel was difficult and slow. Winter froze routes that summer opened. Summer brought challenges of water and insects. These conditions ensured that expansion remained cautious and localized. Alaska's reputation within the United States remained uncertain. Some saw it as a distant burden, others imagined hidden potential waiting to be unlocked. For those living in Alaska, these opinions mattered little. Survival and routine remained the priority. Time passed gently. Years blended together, marked more by seasons than by political milestones. Alaska existed in a state of waiting, not passive but steady. It was not resisting change, nor was it rushing toward it. It simply continued. As you imagine this phase, picture long stretches of quiet coastline, small settlements resting beside wide waters, smoke rising slowly from a few scattered buildings. Beyond them, endless land under open sky. This was Alaska as a quiet American territory, present but distant, claimed but still its own. Change was arriving, but softly, filtered through space, time, and the land's enduring influence. Alaska continued to move forward at its own pace, carrying its silence, resilience, and balance into a future that was still forming, still undefined, and still far beyond the horizon. As the years continued to pass, Alaska remained a territory defined less by action and more by patience. The transfer to the United States had placed it within a new national framework, yet the reality on the ground unfolded slowly, shaped by distance, climate, and the land's quiet authority. This period did not bring sudden transformation. Instead, it allowed Alaska to exist in a prolonged state of stillness, where change arrived gently and unevenly. Life across the territory remained deeply influenced by isolation. Many settlements were separated by hundreds of miles of wilderness, water, and mountains. Travel between them required careful planning and favorable conditions. In winter, routes closed entirely. In summer, long days made travel possible but still demanding. This separation limited centralized development and preserved a strong sense of local independence. For American administrators, Alaska was difficult to manage. Laws written far away often did not account for the realities of life in the North. Enforcement was inconsistent, sometimes absent altogether. Local custom and necessity continued to guide daily decisions more effectively than distant regulation. Alaska functioned as a territory in name, but in practice it remained largely self-directed. Small towns and settlements developed gradually where conditions allowed. These places grew around harbors, rivers, and existing trading centers. Growth was practical rather than ambitious. Buildings were constructed to serve immediate needs, not to symbolize progress. Streets formed organically, shaped by foot traffic rather than design. Life remained quiet, with long periods of stillness between moments of activity. Economic life continued at a modest pace. Fishing expanded slowly, particularly in coastal areas where access to water made transport easier. Small canneries appeared, operating seasonally and employing limited numbers of people. These operations did not dominate the landscape. They existed alongside traditional ways of life, adding another layer rather than replacing what came before. Mining activity began to attract attention in some regions, though it remained limited during this phase. Prospectors arrived quietly, tested the land, and often moved on. The challenges of supply, transport, and climate prevented large-scale development. For every attempt that showed promise, many others faded without notice. Indigenous communities experienced this period as one of gradual, sometimes confusing adjustment. New systems of law, education, and religion appeared intermittently. In some areas, these influences were welcomed selectively. In others, they were met with caution. Traditional knowledge continued to guide survival, especially in remote regions where outside presence remained minimal. Cultural blending occurred slowly. American customs and language entered daily life in certain settlements, while indigenous traditions remained strong beneath the surface. Families adapted in different ways, choosing what to adopt and what to preserve. This process was not uniform. It varied widely from place to place, shaped by geography and contact. The land itself continued to limit the speed of change. Harsh winters discouraged large populations. Long distances increased the cost of building and maintaining infrastructure. Rivers flooded unpredictably. Permafrost complicated construction. These challenges ensured that development remained careful and restrained. Alaska's strategic value was still not fully recognized during this period. Military investment remained minimal. The territory was peaceful, defined more by neglect than by conflict. This absence of urgency allowed Alaska to retain much of its natural character, free from the rapid industrialization seen elsewhere. For many Americans outside Alaska, the territory remained abstract, a place of cold distance and mystery. It appeared in conversation more as an idea than a lived reality. This lack of attention further delayed large-scale involvement, allowing Alaska to continue its quiet existence. Time moved gently, seasons repeated, winters arrived reliably, summers brought brief bursts of activity and light. Life followed these rhythms without haste. Progress, when it occurred, was measured in small steps rather than dramatic milestones. As decades passed, Alaska slowly accumulated experience under American governance without losing its essential character. It remained vast, calm, and lightly touched. Authority existed, but it did not dominate. Change arrived, but it did not rush. As you imagine this final stage of Alaska as a quiet territory, picture long evenings under open skies, a small settlement resting beside a river, distant mountains standing unchanged, smoke rising slowly from a few homes as night approaches. This was Alaska in waiting, neither isolated nor integrated, neither forgotten nor fully known. The territory carried its history forward with patience, holding space for what might come next. It did not hurry toward the future. It allowed the future to approach at its own pace, guided by distance, environment, and the steady endurance that had always defined the land. Number 6. Gold rushes and the slow arrival of industry in Alaska. As Alaska continued its long existence as a quiet and distant territory, another subtle shift began to form, one that did not arrive through policy or planning, but through rumor. Stories started to travel southward, carried by word of mouth rather than certainty. These stories spoke of gold, hidden beneath frozen ground and riverbeds, waiting patiently as it always had. At first they were easy to dismiss. Alaska had always been distant, harsh, and demanding. Yet over time, repetition gave these rumors weight, and curiosity slowly turned into movement. The earliest discoveries of gold in Alaska did not create immediate upheaval. They were isolated findings, known only to a few, and often difficult to verify. The land made no effort to reveal its wealth easily. Gold lay buried beneath ice, gravel, and water, guarded by climate and distance. Those who heard the rumors faced a choice: to believe and risk everything, or to remain where life was more predictable. Gradually, a small number of people chose to go north. Their journeys were slow and uncertain, shaped by weather, terrain, and limited routes. Reaching Alaska required endurance even before work could begin. Ships crossed cold waters. Trails climbed through mountains. Rivers froze, thawed, and flooded unpredictably. Every step reminded travelers that Alaska did not welcome haste. When prospectors arrived, they did not find bustling towns or prepared infrastructure. They found silence, vastness, and land that demanded labor before it offered anything in return. Gold was not lying openly on the surface. It had to be searched for patiently, often through frozen ground that resisted tools and energy alike. Early mining activity remained small-scale. Individuals or small groups worked riverbanks and shallow ground, relying on simple methods. Panning, digging, and careful washing became daily routines. Success was uncertain. Many found nothing. Some found just enough to continue. Few found enough to change their lives. The land did not reward everyone equally. The arrival of prospectors brought a new kind of movement to Alaska, but it was uneven and slow. Camps formed where gold was suspected. These camps were temporary, often dissolving as quickly as they appeared. Shelters were basic, built for survival rather than comfort. Life was focused on work, preparation, and endurance. Indigenous communities observed this change with awareness rather than surprise. Outsiders had come before. These new arrivals were different in motivation, but not in their dependence on the land. Many prospectors relied on indigenous knowledge, how to travel, where to find water, how to survive winter. Without this guidance, few could endure long. Supplies were scarce and expensive. Everything had to be carried or shipped in, often at great cost. Food, tools, and clothing were rationed carefully. Waste was avoided out of necessity. Life became a balance between effort and conservation. Winter shaped everything. When cold arrived, work slowed or stopped entirely. Rivers froze solid. Ground became immovable. Darkness lengthened. Those who had prepared adequately endured. Those who had not often left or did not survive. Alaska did not bend to optimism. It required realism and patience. As word of gold spread, more people arrived, but never all at once. Alaska filtered arrivals through difficulty. Only those willing to endure the journey and conditions remained for long. This prevented sudden overcrowding and preserved the land's quiet character even as activity increased. Small towns began to form slowly around areas of repeated discovery. These settlements were functional rather than planned. Buildings appeared where people stayed. Paths formed where people walked. Nothing was symmetrical or polished. Growth followed need rather than vision. Industry at this stage was still minimal. There were no large machines or extensive operations yet. Mining remained labor-intensive and personal. The idea of large-scale extraction existed, but the means to achieve it lagged behind ambition. Despite hardship, a sense of shared experience developed among those who stayed. Community formed through cooperation, sharing supplies, knowledge, and labor. Isolation encouraged reliance on one another. Competition existed, but survival mattered more. For Alaska as a whole, this period marked the beginning of visible economic interest beyond subsistence and trade. Yet even now, change was slow. Gold did not transform Alaska overnight. It introduced motion, curiosity, and pressure, but the land continued to regulate pace. As you imagine this phase, picture long lines of travelers moving quietly through snow-covered passes, small camps beside frozen rivers, fires burning steadily against the cold, endless land stretching beyond the limits of effort. This was the beginning of Alaska's gold era, not loud, not sudden, a careful awakening of industry shaped by endurance rather than excitement. The land remained dominant, testing every intention, as time continued its slow movement, allowing opportunity to appear, but only to those willing to wait, work, and listen to the quiet demands of the North. As the gold rush era in Alaska continued, its true character became clearer, not as a sudden explosion of wealth or transformation, but as a prolonged test of endurance. Those who arrived with expectations shaped by stories from elsewhere quickly learned that Alaska followed no familiar pattern. Here, gold did not erase hardship. It lived alongside it, buried beneath frozen earth and guarded by distance, weather, and time. With each passing season, more people made the journey north, drawn by reports that traveled faster than certainty. Yet Alaska never received crowds in the way warmer regions had. Every route into the territory demanded effort. Ships crossed cold, unpredictable seas. Trails cut through mountain passes where weather changed without warning. Rivers that served as highways in summer became barriers in winter. Arrival itself filtered who could stay. Mining camps grew gradually, often in isolated valleys or along rivers where gold had been found repeatedly. These camps were never comfortable. Shelters were built quickly, often from whatever materials could be found or carried. Wood was precious, heat was essential. Every structure existed to protect life, not to express permanence. Daily life revolved around labor. Days were long during summer, when light lingered late into the night. Prospectors worked steadily, taking advantage of every hour. In winter, work slowed dramatically. Frozen ground resisted tools. Darkness returned early. Survival replaced ambition. Many camps fell quiet, their residents waiting patiently for thaw. As more discoveries were confirmed, certain camps evolved into small towns. These places developed slowly, shaped by repetition rather than planning. Supply stores appeared where trade was steady. Basic services followed. Blacksmiths, repair shops, places to gather and exchange information. Nothing grew quickly. Everything depended on consistent need and the ability to resupply. Transportation remained the greatest challenge. Moving goods into Alaska required complex coordination. Supplies traveled by sea, then by river or trail. Each stage introduced delay and risk. Prices remained high. Scarcity shaped behavior. Waste was avoided. Planning was constant. Industry during this phase remained limited in scale. While the idea of mechanized mining began to take hold, the reality lagged behind. Machines were heavy, difficult to transport, and required fuel and maintenance. In many areas, traditional methods continued simply because they were practical. Indigenous communities experienced this era unevenly. In some regions, gold activity brought increased contact and disruption. Travel routes overlapped with traditional lands. Hunting grounds were disturbed. Yet indigenous knowledge remained essential. Many prospectors relied on local guidance for travel, survival, and understanding seasonal change. Cultural exchange increased, though not always equally. New goods entered indigenous communities through trade. At the same time, pressure on land and resources created tension. These changes unfolded slowly, shaped by proximity rather than policy. Despite the hardships, a sense of persistence defined this period. Those who stayed adapted. They learned when to work and when to wait. They learned to read weather, conserve energy, and accept uncertainty. Alaska taught patience through repetition. Gold did bring moments of success. Some individuals found enough to justify their effort. Others found just enough to continue. Many found nothing at all. The uneven nature of reward reinforced the reality that Alaska did not guarantee outcomes. It offered possibility, not promise. As activity increased, awareness of Alaska grew beyond rumor. Reports reached the rest of the United States describing both opportunity and hardship. This attention slowly encouraged investment, though cautiously. Alaska was still seen as difficult, expensive, and remote. The environment continued to limit industrial growth. Permafrost complicated construction. Rivers flooded unpredictably. Winters damaged equipment. These factors ensured that development remained measured. Alaska absorbed industry at its own pace, resisting rapid change. As you imagine this stage, picture small towns resting between vast stretches of wilderness, smoke rising from scattered buildings, prospectors moving steadily along riverbanks, the sound of tools echoing briefly, then fading back into silence. This was the gold rush not as legend, but as lived experience, a test of patience, a lesson in limits. Industry arrived slowly, shaped by effort rather than excitement. Alaska remained vast, calm, and uncompromising, allowing progress only where endurance matched the land's demands as time continued its steady, unhurried flow toward the next chapter. As the gold rush era in Alaska continued, its true character became clearer, not as a sudden explosion of wealth or transformation, but as a prolonged test of endurance. Those who arrived with expectations shaped by stories from elsewhere quickly learned that Alaska followed no familiar pattern. Here, gold did not erase hardship. It lived alongside it, buried beneath frozen earth and guarded by distance, weather, and time. With each passing season, more people made the journey north, drawn by reports that traveled faster than certainty. Yet Alaska never received crowds in the way warmer regions had. Every route into the territory demanded effort. Ships crossed cold, unpredictable seas. Trails cut through mountain passes where weather changed without warning. Rivers that served as highways in summer became barriers in winter. Arrival itself filtered who could stay. Mining camps grew gradually, often in isolated valleys or along rivers where gold had been found repeatedly. These camps were never comfortable. Shelters were built quickly, often from whatever materials could be found or carried. Wood was precious. Heat was essential. Every structure existed to protect life, not to express permanence. Daily life revolved around labor. Days were long during summer, when light lingered late into the night. Prospectors worked steadily, taking advantage of every hour. In winter, work slowed dramatically. Frozen ground resisted tools. Darkness returned early. Survival replaced ambition. Many camps fell quiet, their residents waiting patiently for thaw. As more discoveries were confirmed, Certain camps evolved into small towns. These places developed slowly, shaped by repetition rather than planning. Supply stores appeared where trade was steady. Basic services followed. Blacksmiths, repair shops, places to gather and exchange information. Nothing grew quickly. Everything depended on consistent need and the ability to resupply. Transportation remained the greatest challenge. Moving goods into Alaska required complex coordination. Supplies traveled by sea, then by river or trail. Each stage introduced delay and risk. Prices remained high. Scarcity shaped behavior. Waste was avoided. Planning was constant. Industry during this phase remained limited in scale. While the idea of mechanized mining began to take hold, the reality lagged behind. Machines were heavy, difficult to transport, and required fuel and maintenance. In many areas, traditional methods continued simply because they were practical. Indigenous communities experienced this era unevenly. In some regions, gold activity brought increased contact and disruption. Travel routes overlapped with traditional lands. Hunting grounds were disturbed. Yet indigenous knowledge remained essential. Many prospectors relied on local guidance for travel, survival, and understanding seasonal change. Cultural exchange increased, though not always equally. New goods entered indigenous communities through trade. At the same time, pressure on land and resources created tension. These changes unfolded slowly, shaped by proximity rather than policy. Despite the hardships, a sense of persistence defined this period. Those who stayed adapted, they learned when to work and when to wait. They learned to read weather, conserve energy, and accept uncertainty. Alaska taught patience through repetition. Gold did bring moments of success. Some individuals found enough to justify their effort. Others found just enough to continue. Many found nothing at all. The uneven nature of reward reinforced the reality that Alaska did not guarantee outcomes. It offered possibility, not promise. As activity increased, awareness of Alaska grew beyond rumor. Reports reached the rest of the United States describing both opportunity and hardship. This attention slowly encouraged investment, though cautiously. Alaska was still seen as difficult, expensive, and remote. The environment continued to limit industrial growth. Permafrost complicated construction. Rivers flooded unpredictably. Winters damaged equipment. These factors ensured that development remained measured. Alaska absorbed industry at its own pace, resisting rapid change. As you imagine this stage, picture small towns resting between vast stretches of wilderness, smoke rising from scattered buildings, prospectors moving steadily along riverbanks, the sound of tools echoing briefly, then fading back into silence. This was the gold rush, not as legend, but as lived experience, a test of patience, a lesson in limits. Industry arrived slowly, shaped by effort rather than excitement. Alaska remained vast, calm, and uncompromising, allowing progress only where endurance matched the land's demands as time continued its steady, unhurried flow toward the next chapter. As the Gold Rush era moved deeper into Alaska's history, its true legacy became clearer, not in sudden wealth or sweeping transformation, but in gradual, lasting change. The excitement that once pulled people north slowly softened into routine. What remained was not the rush itself, but the quiet infrastructure, habits, and awareness it left behind. Alaska had not been reshaped overnight. Instead, it had absorbed industry slowly, filtering it through climate, distance, and endurance. Many who arrived chasing gold eventually faced a choice. Some left when success proved elusive or hardship overwhelming. Others stayed, no longer driven by the dream of striking it rich, but by the steady rhythm of work and survival they had come to understand. These individuals formed the foundation of longer-lasting communities, transitioning from prospectors to residents. Mining methods began to shift gradually. Where early efforts relied on hand tools and individual labor, small-scale mechanization appeared in certain areas. Simple machines were introduced cautiously, adapted to harsh conditions. Even then, progress remained slow. Transporting equipment required immense effort. Fuel was scarce. Maintenance was constant. Machines did not replace labor so much as extend it carefully. Towns that had survived multiple seasons grew more stable. Buildings became sturdier. Streets became more defined through repeated use. Seasonal businesses learned when to open and when to close. Life still revolved around weather and supply lines, but familiarity reduced uncertainty. These towns were never large, but they endured. Transportation improved incrementally. River routes became better known. Trails were refined through use. Steamships and later vessels increased reliability along certain corridors. These improvements did not eliminate isolation, but they softened it. Alaska became slightly more connected without losing its distance. Economic life diversified slowly. While gold remained important, other activities gained prominence. Fishing expanded. Small-scale trade supported daily needs. Services developed to support mining rather than replace it. Industry layered itself cautiously, never overwhelming existing systems. For indigenous communities, the long-term effects of the gold era were complex. Some regions experienced lasting disruption, while others remained relatively insulated. Traditional knowledge continued to guide survival, especially in areas beyond major mining routes. Cultural resilience allowed many communities to adapt selectively, preserving identity even as change arrived. Environmental impacts became more visible over time. Riverbanks altered, certain areas showed signs of strain, yet Alaska's scale absorbed much of this activity. Nature responded gradually, reclaiming abandoned sites and restoring balance where pressure eased. The land remained powerful, capable of recovery given time. The gold rush altered how Alaska was perceived. No longer just distant and unknown, it became recognized as a place of effort and endurance. Stories traveled south not only of wealth, but of hardship, cold, and resilience. These stories reshaped expectations, discouraging careless movement while attracting those prepared for difficulty. Government presence increased slightly as activity stabilized. Basic regulation appeared, though enforcement remained limited. Alaska continued to operate with a high degree of independence, guided more by necessity than by strict oversight. As years passed, gold discoveries became less central. What remained was experience, knowledge of routes, climate, and survival. This experience supported future development, even as excitement faded. Alaska had been tested and had responded on its own terms. As you imagine this closing phase of the gold rush era, picture quiet towns at dusk, equipment resting unused beside rivers, people who stayed moving calmly through familiar routines. Beyond them, vast wilderness stretching unchanged. This was the end of the rush, not of effort. The fading of excitement, not of presence. Gold had drawn attention to Alaska, but it did not define it. The land absorbed industry slowly, teaching patience and humility. And as the noise of the rush softened into memory, Alaska remained what it had always been, vast, resilient, and steady, carrying forward the lessons of endurance as time continued its quiet, unhurried flow into the next chapter of its long history. Number 7. World War II and the strategic importance of Alaska. As Alaska moved beyond the era of gold rushes and gradual industry, it returned briefly to a familiar quiet. Towns settled into routine. Rivers continued their seasonal rise and fall. Communities adapted to life shaped by distance and weather. It seemed, once again, that Alaska might remain on the far edge of attention, vast, calm, and lightly touched. Yet far beyond its horizons, the world was changing in ways that would soon reach even this remote land. Global tensions were rising slowly at first, carried through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and distant conversation. For many in Alaska, these events felt far away, unfolding across oceans and continents that seemed disconnected from daily life in the north. The land remained still. Winters still arrived on time. Summers still brought long light. Yet gradually, Alaska's position on the map began to matter in new ways. Alaska sat between continents, closer to Asia than most Americans realized. What had once seemed like a disadvantage, distance, cold, isolation, now took on strategic meaning. Military planners began to look northward with renewed interest. The same waters that had challenged explorers and traders now offered pathways of approach and defense. The land's vastness, once a barrier, became a shield. At first, military activity arrived quietly. Small surveys were conducted, reports were written, air routes were considered. These early steps did not disrupt daily life. They were preparatory rather than visible. Alaska continued to appear calm on the surface even as plans took shape beyond its shores. As the world moved closer to open conflict, attention toward Alaska intensified. The need to protect northern approaches grew clearer. Alaska was no longer just a distant territory. It was a potential gateway. This realization brought the first significant increase in federal presence since the territory's acquisition. Construction began carefully. Airfields were planned in locations chosen as much for geography as for necessity. Roads were considered not for convenience, but for connection and supply. Each project faced the same challenges that had always defined Alaska: permafrost, weather, distance, and limited daylight. Progress was slow, deliberate, and often interrupted. For those living in Alaska, these changes were noticeable but measured. New faces appeared. Equipment arrived in stages. Activity increased around certain hubs, while vast areas remained untouched. The land absorbed this movement without haste, just as it had absorbed every other phase of human presence. Indigenous communities observed these developments with awareness shaped by long experience. Outsiders had arrived before, each time bringing change that unfolded unevenly. This new presence felt different in purpose, but familiar in pattern. Life continued according to season and necessity, even as aircraft and vehicles introduced unfamiliar sounds into the landscape. When the United States formally entered World War II, Alaska's role shifted quickly from potential to active importance. Defense became urgent. Construction accelerated where possible. Airfields expanded. Ports were reinforced. Supply routes stretched across enormous distances, connecting Alaska to the rest of the continent. The environment dictated every decision. Frozen ground complicated building. Storms delayed transport. Long winters slowed progress. Workers adapted, learning to plan around darkness and cold. Nothing moved quickly. Even urgency had to submit to climate. Alaska's coastline, once quiet and rarely visited, gained new significance. Patrols increased. Observation posts were established. The ocean, always present and powerful, became both barrier and route. The land's natural features, mountains, islands, and vast open spaces, shaped defense strategies naturally, without needing alteration. Despite increased activity, much of Alaska remained unchanged. Large areas saw no construction at all. Silence continued to dominate daily life outside key locations. Wildlife moved as it always had. Rivers continued their steady paths. The land did not react to human concern. It remained steady, indifferent, and vast. Life for civilians shifted subtly. Supplies became more regulated. Transportation prioritized military needs. Yet communities adapted calmly, drawing on long familiarity with scarcity and delay. Patience, already well practiced, became essential once more. The presence of soldiers introduced new rhythms into certain towns. Movement increased. Languages and accents blended briefly. Yet even this influx felt temporary. Alaska had taught many before that nothing here stayed unchanged for long. Not ice, not settlement, not human presence. As you imagine this phase, picture long runways carved carefully into open land. Aircraft resting under wide skies. Soldiers moving quietly in cold air. Beyond them, endless wilderness continuing its ancient stillness. This was Alaska entering the global stage, not through choice, but through position. World War II brought urgency to a land accustomed to patience. Yet even as strategic importance grew, Alaska remained itself, vast, challenging, and unhurried, allowing change only at the pace the land permitted. As time continued its steady, calm movement into a new and uncertain era. As World War II progressed, Alaska moved fully into a role it had never expected to play. What had once been a distant and quiet territory now stood at the edge of global conflict. This shift did not happen with spectacle or celebration. It unfolded through steady preparation, long hours of labor, and the constant awareness that Alaska's position on the map had placed it closer to danger than ever before. Military activity expanded across the territory, though always unevenly. Certain locations became centers of intense focus, while vast regions remained unchanged and silent. Airfields were extended and reinforced, carved carefully into land that resisted construction. Permafrost required constant adjustment. Foundations had to be rethought. Buildings were designed not for comfort, but for function and endurance. Every structure reflected compromise with the environment. The construction of military infrastructure became one of the largest organized efforts Alaska had ever seen. Roads were pushed slowly through wilderness, not to encourage settlement, but to allow movement of supplies and personnel. These routes were difficult to maintain. Mud in summer and ice in winter challenged every mile. Progress was measured not in speed, but in persistence. Air routes gained particular importance. Alaska became a key link in the movement of aircraft between continents. Pilots learned to navigate vast distances under challenging conditions, limited visibility, extreme cold, and unpredictable weather. Airfields dotted remote areas, often surrounded by nothing but open land and sky. These sites felt isolated, yet vital. For soldiers stationed in Alaska, daily life was defined by routine and restraint. The environment demanded respect. Training occurred in cold wind and darkness. Equipment froze. Simple tasks required extra effort. Patience became a skill as important as strength. Many soldiers arrived expecting hardship, but few fully understood Alaska's demands until they lived within them. Indigenous communities experienced this period with mixed impact. In some regions, military activity brought disruption. New construction restricted movement and unfamiliar authority. In others, life continued much as before, insulated by distance. Where interaction occurred, Indigenous knowledge proved valuable once again. Understanding weather, terrain, and survival in the north became essential to military success. The presence of war altered the rhythm of certain towns. Populations increased temporarily. Supplies moved more frequently. Noise became more common near bases and ports. Yet even in these areas, silence returned quickly once activity paused. Alaska never fully lost its quiet character. The land absorbed sound and motion easily, reclaiming stillness whenever possible. Strategic planning emphasized defense rather than expansion. Alaska was not a place to conquer outward from, it was a place to hold. Coastal defenses were strengthened. Observation posts monitored vast stretches of water and land. The goal was awareness, not aggression. The land's natural barriers, mountains, islands, and distance worked alongside human effort. The threat of conflict felt real but distant for many. Most Alaskans experienced the war through preparation rather than direct engagement. Supplies were rationed, travel was controlled. Information arrived selectively. Life continued, shaped by caution rather than fear. Weather remained an unpredictable factor. Storms grounded aircraft, snow delayed transport, ice altered plans without warning. These conditions reinforced a familiar lesson. No matter the urgency, Alaska set its own pace. Human plans adapted or failed. The land did not adjust. Despite the global scale of the war, Alaska's involvement remained focused and contained. There were no massive urban centers, no widespread destruction. The territory's role was quiet but essential, defined by position rather than presence. It served as a bridge, a shield, and a reminder of the world's vastness. As the war continued, experience accumulated, systems improved, coordination became smoother. Those stationed in Alaska learned how to work with the land rather than against it. This knowledge would later shape future development, even after conflict ended. For civilians, the war years reinforced habits already familiar: planning ahead, conserving resources, accepting delay. Alaska had long required these skills. The war simply made them more visible. As you imagine this phase, picture long winter nights at remote airfields, engines warming slowly in cold air, soldiers standing quietly under wide skies. Beyond them, darkness stretching endlessly across land unchanged by conflict. This was Alaska at war, not through battle, but through readiness. World War II brought attention, urgency, and responsibility to a land accustomed to patience. Yet even in this moment of global tension, Alaska remained grounded in its enduring reality, vast, resilient, and steady, holding its role quietly as time continued its slow, deliberate movement forward. As World War II moved toward its later years, Alaska settled into a rhythm shaped by vigilance rather than urgency. The early uncertainty that had accompanied the first waves of military attention gradually gave way to routine. What had once felt temporary now carried a sense of continuity. The land remained vast and quiet, but within certain areas, life followed patterns defined by preparation, observation, and endurance. Military installations across Alaska became familiar landmarks rather than sudden intrusions. Airfields that had been carved into tundra and forest now functioned with practiced efficiency. Runways stretched across open land, maintained carefully against frost and shifting ground. Aircraft arrived and departed on schedules shaped as much by weather as by command. Engines warmed slowly in the cold air, their sound rising briefly before fading back into silence. Ports and coastal facilities operated steadily, receiving supplies brought across long and uncertain routes. Ships arrived carrying fuel, food, equipment, and letters from far away. These arrivals were moments of connection, reminders that Alaska, despite its isolation, was now firmly linked to a global effort. Yet even these moments were quiet. There were no crowds, no spectacle, only steady work carried out against a backdrop of wind, water, and open sky. Roads built during the war remained difficult to maintain, but they changed how people moved through the land. Travel that once took weeks by river or trail could now be done more directly, though never easily. Mud in summer and ice in winter challenged every journey. Vehicles moved cautiously, aware that the land tolerated use but never surrendered control. For soldiers stationed in Alaska, daily life became defined by routine rather than anticipation. Training continued, adapted to cold and darkness. Patrols were carried out methodically, often without incident. Observation became a primary task, watching skies, coastlines, and distant horizons. The work was quiet, repetitive, and demanding in its own way. Patience was essential. Isolation shaped experience deeply. Many stationed in Alaska felt far removed from the main theaters of war. News arrived late, filtered through distance. This separation created a sense of existing alongside history rather than within it. Time moved differently. Days were marked by light and weather, more than by headlines or announcements. The environment remained an ever-present force. Storms grounded flights without warning. Snow buried equipment overnight. Ice altered coastlines and river routes. These conditions demanded constant adjustment. Plans changed frequently. Flexibility became routine. Alaska reminded everyone that even in war, nature held authority. Indigenous communities continued to navigate this period with resilience shaped by long experience. In areas near military activity, change was unavoidable. Movement was restricted. Construction altered familiar spaces. Yet life adapted carefully. Traditional knowledge remained essential, particularly in understanding weather, terrain, and seasonal change. In more remote regions, life continued largely as it had before, insulated by distance and scale. Civilian life across Alaska reflected a mixture of adjustment and continuity. Supplies were managed carefully. Transportation followed military priorities. Yet everyday routines persisted: fishing, maintaining homes, preparing for winter. Communities drew on habits of cooperation and foresight that had always been necessary in the North. As the war progressed, Alaska's strategic role became clearer. It was not a place of constant conflict, but of positioning and protection. Its value lay in what it prevented rather than what it experienced. The land served as a quiet guardian, its distance and scale acting as natural defense. When the war finally began to draw toward its conclusion, change arrived slowly. Military activity did not end suddenly. Instead, it softened. Schedules eased, construction slowed. Some installations remained active while others began to quiet. Soldiers prepared to leave or transition, carrying with them memories shaped by cold, silence, and vastness. For Alaska, the end of the war did not bring dramatic transformation. It brought reflection. Infrastructure remained. Roads, airfields, and ports stood as reminders of a period when the world's attention had turned northward. These structures would later influence development, but at the moment they simply existed. New layers upon an ancient landscape. The land absorbed the shift gently. Where activity slowed, silence returned. Snow covered unused paths. Wind moved across empty runways. Wildlife reclaimed spaces where movement had paused. Alaska returned to stillness with ease, as it always had. As you imagine this closing chapter of the war years, picture a quiet airfield at dusk, lights dim, engines silent, a wide sky stretching endlessly above. Beyond the structures, mountains and tundra remain unchanged, holding time gently. This was Alaska at the close of World War II, not marked by victory celebrations or destruction, but by endurance and quiet significance. The war had brought attention and infrastructure, but it had not altered Alaska's essence. The land remained vast, resilient, and patient, ready to carry these experiences forward as part of its long story, allowing the next chapter to unfold slowly, guided once again by distance, environment, and the steady passage of time. Number 8. Statehood and the shaping of modern Alaska. As the years following World War II unfolded, Alaska entered a period of quiet reconsideration. The war had passed, leaving behind airfields, roads, and a renewed awareness of Alaska's position in the wider world. Yet when the urgency faded, what remained was a land still vast, still demanding, and still distant from the centers of American life. The question that slowly began to take shape was not sudden or loud, but steady and persistent. What was Alaska to become next? For decades, Alaska had existed as a territory, connected to the United States in name, but separated by distance, climate, and experience. Many who lived there felt this separation deeply. Decisions were made far away, laws were written without full understanding of the land. Representation was limited. Daily life continued, shaped far more by environment than by politics, yet the sense of being overlooked quietly endured. At the same time, Alaska was changing. Infrastructure built during the war did not disappear. Roads remained, connecting places that had once been isolated. Air travel became more reliable, shrinking distance in ways that had once seemed impossible. Communication improved slowly. Alaska was no longer as unreachable as it had been before, even if it still felt remote. Population patterns began to shift gently. Some soldiers who had come during the war chose to stay, drawn by the land's openness and the rhythm of life it offered. Others arrived seeking opportunity, work, or simply space. Growth was never sudden. It happened gradually, shaped by climate and cost, rather than enthusiasm alone. With these changes came renewed discussion about Alaska's political future. Statehood was not an idea embraced overnight. It had been debated quietly for years, sometimes dismissed as impractical, sometimes championed as overdue. Support grew slowly, driven by a desire for representation, self-determination, and recognition that Alaska was no longer just a distant holding. Opposition also existed. Some questioned whether Alaska's small population and harsh conditions justified statehood. Others worried about the cost of governance and infrastructure. These debates unfolded far from the land itself, often without reflecting daily realities. Meanwhile, life in Alaska continued much as it always had, season by season, steady and patient. For many Alaskans, the idea of statehood represented more than political status. It symbolized belonging. It suggested that Alaska's voice might finally carry weight equal to its size. Yet even among supporters, there was caution. Alaska had always relied on independence and adaptation. Any new structure would need to respect that reality. Indigenous communities viewed this transition through their own experience. Statehood discussions raised questions about land, rights, and governance that were deeply connected to long histories of stewardship and survival. These concerns were complex and often unresolved, shaped by layers of past agreements and misunderstandings. Change promised recognition for some, uncertainty for others. As momentum grew, Alaska's path towards statehood remained calm rather than dramatic. There were no mass protests or sweeping movements across the land. Support built through conversation, organization, and persistence. The pace reflected Alaska itself, measured, deliberate, and grounded. When statehood finally arrived, it did so without spectacle. There were ceremonies, announcements, and official moments, but the land itself did not react. Mountains remained still, rivers flowed as they always had. Snow fell and melted according to season. Alaska became a state on paper, but in daily life change arrived slowly. Governance structures shifted gradually, representation expanded. Local voices gained new channels, yet distance and environment continued to shape reality. Roads still required maintenance, winters still demanded preparation. Statehood did not remove hardship. It offered responsibility alongside recognition. Economic development began to be discussed more openly. Statehood encouraged investment and planning, though always tempered by Alaska's conditions. Growth was never easy. Projects required patience, resources, and long-term thinking. The land continued to set limits, reminding planners that progress here followed different rules. For many residents, statehood felt less like a beginning and more like an acknowledgement of what already existed. Alaska had long functioned with resilience and self-reliance. Becoming a state simply placed a formal name on that reality. As you imagine this moment in Alaska's history, picture a quiet town under wide skies, a flag moving gently in the wind, roads stretching outward into vastness, life continuing without hurry. This was the beginning of modern Alaska, not through transformation, but through recognition. Statehood did not change the land. It did not soften winters or shorten distances. It simply marked Alaska's place within a larger story, allowing the next chapter to unfold at the same calm pace the land had always required, slow, steady, and deeply rooted in endurance. After statehood was formally recognized, Alaska entered a long, quiet phase of adjustment. There was no sudden transformation, no dramatic shift in daily life. Instead, change arrived in small, steady movements, spreading gently across years rather than months. The land remained vast and unchanged, but the way people thought about Alaska and their place within it began to evolve slowly. Becoming a state brought new responsibilities along with new recognition. Governance now required local decision-making on a scale Alaska had not managed before. Institutions were formed carefully, shaped by practical need rather than ambition. Laws and systems were adapted to fit a land where distance could not be ignored, and climate shaped every outcome. Progress followed a thoughtful pace, avoiding excess, learning through experience. Representation mattered deeply to many Alaskans. Having a voice that carried beyond the territory felt meaningful, even if it did not immediately alter daily routines. Decisions still required patience. Communication with the rest of the country still took time. But there was a sense, subtle yet real, that Alaska was no longer an afterthought. Infrastructure development continued cautiously. Roads were extended where possible, though terrain and weather imposed firm limits. Air travel expanded further, becoming a defining feature of modern Alaskan life. Planes connected remote communities, shortened distances, and reshaped how people moved across the land. Even so, travel remained expensive and weather-dependent. Technology assisted, but nature still decided. Population growth remained modest. Alaska did not experience rapid expansion. Those who came tended to stay only if they understood the realities of life there. Winters remained long. Darkness tested endurance. Isolation required emotional resilience. growth filtered itself naturally, leaving behind communities shaped by commitment rather than convenience. For Indigenous peoples, the post-statehood era continued to bring both challenge and negotiation. Questions of land, governance, and cultural preservation remained unresolved in many areas. Conversations unfolded slowly, often unevenly, shaped by long histories and competing priorities. Through it all, cultural identity persisted, carried forward through language, tradition, and relationship to the land. Economic planning became more structured, though never simple. Alaska's resources attracted attention, but development required careful consideration. Distance increased cost. Weather limited access. Environmental sensitivity demanded restraint. Statehood did not remove these realities. It made them central to planning. Education and public services expanded gradually. Schools reached more areas, though access remained uneven. Healthcare improved in some regions while remaining limited in others. These systems developed with awareness that uniform solutions rarely worked in Alaska. Flexibility became essential. Civic identity strengthened quietly. Alaskans began to see themselves not only as residents of a remote land, but as participants in a shared future. Pride grew, not loud or boastful, but grounded in endurance. Living in Alaska was not easy, and that difficulty shaped a distinct sense of belonging. Despite these shifts, daily life remained deeply tied to nature. Fishing seasons continued to guide activity. Winter preparation remained essential. Communities relied on cooperation and foresight. Statehood did not replace these habits, it reinforced their importance. As you imagine this period, picture a growing town surrounded by open land, small planes arriving and departing, roads fading into wilderness, people planning carefully, thinking long term. This was Alaska learning how to be a state in its own way, not by copying others, but by adapting structure to landscape. Modern Alaska did not rush forward. It moved carefully, thoughtfully, carrying its past into a future shaped by patience, resilience, and deep respect for the land that continued, unchanged and enduring, to define everything around it. As Alaska moved further into the years following statehood, a deeper sense of continuity began to settle across the land. The excitement and uncertainty that had accompanied the transition slowly softened into routine. Governance became familiar. Systems that once felt new blended into everyday life. Alaska did not rush to redefine itself. Instead, it allowed modern identity to emerge gradually, shaped by habit, environment, and long memory. Statehood brought Alaska closer to the rest of the country in structure, but distance remained a defining reality. Even with improved communication and transportation, Alaska existed on its own scale of time and space. Decisions still required long planning. Projects unfolded slowly. The land continued to resist haste, reminding everyone that progress here followed different rules. Communities across Alaska continued to adapt in their own ways. Larger towns experienced modest growth, while smaller settlements focused on sustainability rather than expansion. Life remained deeply local. Neighbors relied on one another. Shared effort mattered more than individual ambition. These patterns reflected traditions far older than statehood itself. Economic activity became more organized, but never simple. Industries developed carefully, shaped by cost, climate, and distance. Employment followed seasonal rhythms. Some years were easier than others. Stability came not from abundance, but from preparation and flexibility. Alaska taught patience through repetition. The role of the natural environment remained central. Weather continued to guide daily decisions. Long winters encouraged planning and cooperation. Summers brought intense activity followed by rest. Light and darkness shaped emotional rhythm as much as practical routine. Modern life adapted to these patterns rather than replacing them. Indigenous communities continued to carry forward cultural identity amid changing structures. Language, tradition, and relationship to land remained sources of strength. While challenges persisted, so did resilience. Knowledge passed through generations provided continuity in a changing political landscape. Education and public services continued to improve gradually. Access expanded unevenly, shaped by geography. Remote communities relied on creative solutions. Technology assisted where possible, but human connection remained essential. Alaska's scale required adaptability rather than uniformity. As years passed, Alaskans developed a stronger shared identity. Pride emerged quietly, not rooted in comparison, but in endurance. Living in Alaska meant understanding limitation and possibility at the same time. It meant accepting difficulty without complaint. This mindset shaped modern culture more than any law or policy. Despite increasing connection to the outside world, Alaska retained its sense of separation. This separation was not isolation alone, it was space. Space for silence, space for reflection, space for land to remain dominant. Even as modern systems expanded, vast areas remained untouched, holding the same stillness they always had. Statehood did not erase Alaska's past. It layered new responsibility onto old resilience. The land absorbed this change as it absorbed everything else, slowly, patiently, without resistance or surrender. Modern Alaska emerged not as something entirely new, but as a continuation shaped by recognition rather than transformation. As you imagine this phase, picture a quiet road stretching into open land, a town resting under a wide sky, lights glowing softly against long darkness, life continuing steadily without hurry. This was modern Alaska taking shape, not through speed, but through balance. Statehood gave structure, but the land gave meaning. And as time continued its gentle flow, Alaska moved forward calmly, carrying ancient rhythms into modern life, allowing identity to deepen slowly, guided always by distance, endurance, and the quiet strength of a place that had never needed to change quickly to remain whole. Number 9. Oil, environment, and economic transformation of Alaska. As Alaska moved deeper into the modern era, a new force quietly began to shape its future, one that would bring opportunity, debate, and long-lasting transformation. This force was not sudden, and it did not arrive with noise or celebration. Instead, it emerged slowly from beneath the land itself, hidden for centuries, waiting patiently. Oil would come to redefine Alaska's economy, its relationship with the environment, and its place within the wider world. Before oil, Alaska's economy remained modest and carefully balanced. Fishing, small-scale industry, seasonal work, and government services formed the backbone of daily life. These activities followed natural rhythms. Seasons dictated income, distance limited growth, life required preparation rather than expansion. This balance, though challenging, felt familiar. Early exploration for oil began cautiously. Survey teams moved across remote regions guided by geology rather than urgency. The land did not reveal its resources easily. Harsh weather, isolation, and limited infrastructure slowed every effort. Progress came not through speed, but persistence. Each discovery required patience, careful planning, and acceptance of uncertainty. When significant oil reserves were finally confirmed, the news spread slowly at first, then steadily. Attention turned north once again. Unlike gold rushes of the past, this moment did not bring crowds of individuals chasing fortune. It brought organizations, planning, and long-term investment. The scale of the oil extraction required coordination rather than spontaneity. Development unfolded with caution. Alaska's environment imposed limits that could not be ignored. Permafrost challenged construction, extreme cold affected equipment, vast distances complicated transport. Every step required adaptation. Oil did not replace Alaska's realities, it had to operate within them. The construction of pipelines became one of the most defining features of this era. These structures were not merely industrial projects. They were symbols of compromise between human ambition and environmental constraint. Routes were chosen carefully. Engineering solutions respected the land's movement and fragility. The pipeline did not dominate the landscape, it followed it. Economic change arrived gradually, revenue increased. Public services expanded, infrastructure improved, communities experienced new opportunities, though unevenly. Some areas benefited directly, while others felt little immediate change. Growth was never uniform. Alaska absorbed economic transformation in layers rather than waves. With opportunity came debate. Environmental protection became central to conversation. Alaska's wilderness was not just scenery, it was identity. Many questioned how development could coexist with preservation. These discussions unfolded over years, shaped by respect for the land and concern for future generations. Indigenous communities played a crucial role in these conversations. Their relationship with the land extended beyond economics. Oil development raised questions about stewardship, rights, and long-term impact. These discussions were complex, often slow, and deeply important. Decisions carried weight beyond immediate benefit. Daily life continued alongside transformation. People still prepared for winter. Fishing seasons remained vital. Darkness and light still shaped routine. Oil changed systems, not seasons. Alaska remained governed by nature first, economy second. As you imagine this chapter, picture a vast landscape under quiet skies. Machinery moving slowly across tundra. Pipelines stretching carefully through open land. Silence returning as work pauses. This was the beginning of a new economic chapter. Not rushed, not simple. Oil did not redefine Alaska overnight. It became another layer in a long story, one that balanced progress with restraint, opportunity with responsibility. And as time continued its calm movement forward, Alaska carried this transformation carefully, allowing economy and environment to exist in cautious, deliberate tension, shaped always by patience, distance, and respect for the land. As oil development moved from discovery into active production, Alaska entered a period of careful adjustment. The presence of oil did not overwhelm the land all at once. Instead, it introduced a steady current of change that flowed alongside existing ways of life. Alaska did not abandon its rhythms. It tested this new economic force slowly, measuring each step against the realities of distance, climate, and environmental responsibility. The construction and operation of oil infrastructure required constant attention. Pipelines, pumping stations, and support facilities operated in an environment that never allowed complacency. Cold affected metal. Shifting ground demanded flexibility. Engineers and workers learned quickly that systems designed elsewhere needed adaptation here. Maintenance became a daily commitment rather than an occasional task. Revenue from oil began to reshape Alaska's public landscape. Funds supported roads, schools, healthcare, and local services. Improvements arrived unevenly, but they were noticeable. Some communities experienced new stability, others saw limited benefit, reinforcing Alaska's long-standing pattern of regional difference. Growth did not erase disparity, it revealed it more clearly. The relationship between oil and environment remained central. Alaska's wilderness was vast, but not invulnerable. Careful monitoring became essential. Systems were put in place to minimize disruption, yet concern remained. The land carried memory. Rivers, tundra, and wildlife responded slowly to disturbance. Responsibility extended far beyond immediate profit. Public conversation deepened over time. Oil was neither fully embraced nor fully rejected. It was understood as powerful and necessary, yet risky. Alaskans approached this reality with characteristic pragmatism. Planning focused on balance rather than extremes. The question was never simply how to extract, but how to coexist. Employment opportunities expanded, though often temporarily. Oil work brought cycles of activity, periods of intense labor followed by quiet. Workers adapted to rotation schedules, traveling long distances between job and home. This pattern fit Alaska's broader rhythm, where movement and pause had always defined life. Indigenous communities continued to engage actively with oil development. Land use, consultation, and long-term impact remained critical concerns. In some cases, agreements offered opportunity and influence. In others, tension persisted. These conversations unfolded slowly, shaped by history, respect, and caution. The land's future remained central to every discussion. Wildlife patterns were closely observed. Migration routes, breeding grounds, and seasonal movement mattered deeply. Alaska's connection to nature was not abstract, it was lived. Fishing, hunting, and observation tied people directly to environmental health. Oil development existed within this awareness, never separate from it. Despite economic growth, Alaska did not become crowded or hurried. Vast areas remained untouched. Silence still dominated most of the land. Even near industrial sites, stillness returned quickly when activity paused. Alaska absorbed motion, then restored calm. As oil revenue stabilized, planning extended further into the future. Discussions turned toward sustainability, savings, and preparation for eventual decline. Alaska understood cycles well. Nothing here was permanent. Not ice, not settlements, not industry. The goal became readiness rather than dependence. As you imagine this phase, picture a pipeline stretching across open tundra under a wide sky. Workers moving methodically. Beyond them, mountains and rivers unchanged. Wind passing freely through space untouched by sound. This was Alaska balancing transformation with restraint, using resources without surrendering identity. Oil reshaped the economy, but it did not replace the land's authority. Alaska remained guided by patience, distance, and awareness, carrying economic change carefully, ensuring that progress moved no faster than the land itself would allow as time continued its quiet, steady flow forward. As Alaska continued to live alongside oil development, the relationship between economy and environment matured into something quieter and more reflective. The early years of discovery and construction had passed. What remained was long-term presence. Oil was no longer new, yet it was never fully ordinary. It existed as a constant factor, powerful, useful, and always requiring careful attention. With time, Alaskans grew more accustomed to the rhythms oil created. Production followed steady cycles rather than dramatic bursts. Revenue arrived predictably, then fluctuated, reminding everyone that dependence carried risk. This understanding shaped decision-making. Alaska had learned from earlier eras that single-resource economies could not last forever. Oil was valuable, but it was not permanent. The state began to think more deliberately about the future. Saving, planning, and restraint became important themes. Oil income was treated not as endless wealth, but as a temporary opportunity that needed to be managed wisely. This mindset reflected Alaska's deeper culture, one shaped by preparation, caution, and long winters that taught the value of foresight. Public services continued to benefit from oil revenue. Schools, infrastructure, and community programs improved in many areas, yet growth remained uneven. Remote communities still faced challenges of access, cost, and distance. Oil did not erase geography, it worked within it. Alaska remained a place where location mattered deeply. Environmental monitoring became a permanent part of life. Attention to land, water, and wildlife did not fade with familiarity. Instead, it deepened. Alaskans understood that damage might not appear immediately. The land responded slowly. Rivers carried memory. Tundra healed gradually. Protection required patience equal to development. Debate remained present, but it was no longer urgent or reactive. It became thoughtful and ongoing. Conversations about balance continued across generations. Younger Alaskans grew up with oil as a fact of life, yet they also inherited respect for wilderness and silence. Identity formed around holding these realities together, rather than choosing between them. Indigenous voices continued to shape discussion. Long-term stewardship remained central to cultural values. Oil development intersected with questions of land rights, self-determination, and continuity. These conversations were rarely simple. They unfolded slowly, shaped by trust, experience, and memory. The land remained at the center of every perspective. Economic diversification gained importance. Fishing, tourism, local business, and public service continued to play essential roles. Oil did not replace these industries. It existed alongside them. Alaska resisted becoming defined by a single narrative. Variety supported resilience. Daily life remained grounded in nature. Despite modern systems, weather still shaped decisions, seasons still mattered. Darkness and light continue to influence rhythm and mood. Oil revenue did not change the length of winter or the openness of summer. The land remained the dominant presence. As time passed, infrastructure aged. Maintenance became as important as construction once had been. Pipelines required constant care. Systems demanded vigilance. Alaska understood that responsibility did not end with building. It continued indefinitely. The global context shifted as well. Energy markets changed. Environmental awareness grew worldwide. Alaska found itself part of larger conversations about sustainability, climate, and future planning. Yet these global discussions filtered into Alaska slowly, interpreted through local experience rather than external pressure. The land itself remained the ultimate measure. Vast areas stayed untouched. Silence continued to define most of Alaska. Even near development, stillness returned easily. The scale of the land absorbed human activity without losing its character. As you imagine this phase, picture a quiet stretch of tundra beneath a wide sky, a pipeline visible in the distance resting calmly, wind moving freely, no urgency, no crowd, just presence. This was Alaska living with oil rather than chasing it. Not controlled by economy, but informed by it. Oil changed Alaska's financial landscape, but it did not redefine its soul. The land remained patient, people remained cautious. The future was approached with the same mindset that had always sustained life here: respect, balance, and preparation. And as time continued its steady, unhurried flow, Alaska carried this chapter forward gently, knowing that resources come and go, but land, memory, and resilience endure far longer, shaping every chapter that follows in quiet continuity. Number 10. Contemporary Alaska and life at the edge of time in Alaska. As Alaska moved fully into the contemporary era, it did so without abandoning the quiet character that had always defined it. Modern life arrived gradually, layered gently over older rhythms rather than replacing them. The land remained vast, the distances long, and the pace deliberate. Alaska did not rush to become modern. It allowed modernity to settle in slowly, adapting it to the realities of climate, space, and silence. In the present day, Alaska exists in a balance between connection and separation. Technology has shortened distances in some ways. Communication travels instantly. Air travel links communities that were once isolated for months at a time, yet physical distance remains real. Weather still interrupts plans. Darkness still arrives early in winter. Light still stretches endlessly in summer. The land continues to shape daily life more than any system built upon it. Communities across Alaska vary widely, yet they share common understanding. In cities, modern conveniences exist alongside awareness of nature's authority. In smaller towns and villages, life remains deeply tied to seasons and cooperation. Everywhere, preparation matters. People plan ahead, knowing that delays are inevitable and self-reliance is essential. The relationship between people and land remains central. Hunting, fishing, and gathering are not just traditions, but ongoing practices that connect daily life to environment. Even those who live more urban lives feel the influence of wilderness nearby. Alaska's scale ensures that nature is never far away, never fully contained. Climate has become an increasingly visible presence in contemporary life. Changes unfold slowly but noticeably. Ice patterns shift. Weather grows less predictable. These changes are observed carefully, not with panic, but with concern shaped by experience. Alaskans are accustomed to reading subtle signs in the land. Adaptation has always been necessary here, and it remains so. Economic life continues to be diverse and cautious. Oil remains important, but it no longer defines everything. Fishing, tourism, local enterprise, and public service all contribute. Work often follows cycles, with periods of intensity followed by rest. This rhythm aligns naturally with Alaska's seasonal patterns. Tourism introduces new movement, especially during warmer months. Visitors arrive seeking quiet, space, and connection to nature. Many leave changed by the experience, having encountered a pace of life unfamiliar to them. Alaska absorbs this movement gently, returning to stillness when seasons shift. Indigenous cultures remain a living foundation of Alaska's identity. language, tradition, and relationship to land continue to guide community life. Knowledge passed through generations remains relevant, offering insight into sustainability and balance. These cultures are not relics of the past, but active parts of the present. Modern governance and infrastructure exist, but they operate within limits set by geography. Roads end, services adapt, solutions are often local rather than uniform. Alaska resists standardization, requiring flexibility instead. This approach reflects long experience with unpredictability. Silence remains one of Alaska's most defining features. Even in populated areas, quiet is never far away. Night returns darkness without apology. Sound carries differently across open space. This silence is not empty, it is full of awareness. It invites reflection and rest. As you imagine contemporary Alaska, picture a town at dusk, lights glowing softly against long shadow, a road stretching outward into open land, wind moving steadily, life continuing without urgency. This is Alaska today, modern yet ancient in rhythm, connected yet separate. Life here exists at the edge of time, not behind it, not ahead of it, but alongside it. The past remains present, the future is approached carefully, and the land, unchanged in its essence, continues to guide every moment, allowing Alaska to move forward calmly, deliberately, and whole as time flows on in quiet continuity. As contemporary life in Alaska continues to unfold, it does so with a quiet awareness of contrast. Modern systems exist alongside ancient rhythms, and neither fully replaces the other. Technology, governance, and global connection have reached even the farthest regions, yet they rest lightly on a land that has never hurried and never yielded completely. Alaska lives in the present, while carrying the weight of deep time beneath every step. In many communities, daily life is shaped by careful balance. People rely on modern tools, communication devices, transportation, energy systems, yet remain prepared for moments when those systems fail or pause. Power outages, weather delays, and isolation are not emergencies so much as expected interruptions. Preparation remains a habit learned early and practiced often. This mindset separates Alaska from places where convenience is assumed. Urban centers have grown more defined, offering services, education, and employment that connect Alaska more closely to the wider world. Yet even here, nature remains present. Mountains frame skylines, water borders neighborhoods. Wildlife moves through edges of development without ceremony. The boundary between built and wild is thin, reminding residents daily of the land's quiet dominance. In smaller towns and villages, contemporary life remains deeply local. Seasonal rhythms guide activity. Food is gathered, stored, and shared with intention. Community ties are strong, shaped by reliance rather than proximity alone. Modern communication connects these places outward, but identity remains inward, rooted in land, memory, and shared experience. Transportation continues to define Alaska's relationship with time. Travel is possible but never guaranteed. Flights depend on weather. Roads stretch long and end suddenly. Boats follow seasonal patterns. Movement requires patience and flexibility. This reality slows life naturally, creating space for reflection even amid modern schedules. Education and knowledge sharing have expanded, blending traditional understanding with contemporary learning. Young Alaskans grow up navigating both worlds, learning modern skills while absorbing cultural and environmental knowledge passed down through family and community. This blending creates continuity rather than division, ensuring that modern life does not erase memory. The natural environment remains an active participant in daily life. Weather patterns influence mood, planning, and activity. Long periods of darkness encourage rest and introspection. Extended daylight brings energy and motion. These cycles affect emotional rhythm as much as practical routine, shaping how people experience time itself. Climate awareness has grown quietly but steadily. Changes are observed firsthand: altered ice conditions, shifting seasons, new patterns of movement among animals. Alaskans tend to respond with observation rather than alarm, Adaptation has always been part of life here. The land teaches adjustment through experience rather than theory. Economic life reflects caution learned over generations. Industries rise and fall, but dependence is avoided where possible. Many people maintain multiple skills, adapting work to season and opportunity. This flexibility supports resilience. Stability is found not in predictability, but in readiness. Despite global connection, Alaska retains emotional distance from constant urgency. News arrives, but it does not always dominate. Time moves differently here. Events are considered rather than reacted to. Silence remains valued, rest is respected. The absence of constant noise allows thought to settle and breath to slow. Cultural expression continues to evolve. Art, music, and storytelling reflect both tradition and contemporary experience. These expressions are often quiet, personal, and reflective, shaped by space and solitude rather than crowd and speed. Creativity here mirrors the land itself, expansive, patient, and grounded. As you imagine this phase of modern Alaska, picture a winter evening inside a warm home. Outside, snow falls softly. Inside, light glows gently. Conversation is unhurried. Beyond the walls, darkness stretches wide and calm. This is life at the edge of time, not rushed by the future, not trapped in the past. Alaska continues forward with awareness rather than urgency. Modern life exists here not as a force of change, but as a companion to enduring rhythms. And as time moves on, slowly, steadily, the land remains constant, guiding each moment with quiet authority, allowing contemporary Alaska to exist in balance, patience, and deep continuity. As Alaska continues into the present moment, it does so with a calm awareness that time here behaves differently. The modern world presses forward with speed in many places, but Alaska absorbs that pressure slowly, allowing only what fits its rhythm to remain. Life here unfolds at the meeting point of past and present, where ancient landscapes and modern tools coexist without urgency. For many Alaskans, contemporary life is defined by attentiveness. Attention to weather, to season, to distance, and to one another remains essential. Even with advanced forecasting and communication, nature retains the final word. Storms still arrive unexpectedly. Ice still shifts. Darkness and light still alter perception and emotion. These forces remind people daily that control is partial and humility necessary. Homes across Alaska reflect this understanding. Built for warmth, durability, and self-sufficiency, they are places of refuge rather than display. Inside, life slows naturally. Meals are shared without hurry. Evenings are often quiet. Silence is familiar and welcome, not something to be filled. This domestic rhythm carries forward traditions shaped long before electricity or internet arrived. Community life remains deeply important. In a land where help may be far away, cooperation is not optional. Neighbors check on one another, knowledge is shared freely. Celebrations are modest but meaningful. This social fabric supports resilience, allowing modern life to exist without dependence on constant external support. Technology is used thoughtfully. It connects families across distance, supports education, and enables work that would otherwise be impossible. Yet it does not dominate. Many Alaskans are comfortable stepping away from screens, returning attention to immediate surroundings. The land encourages presence. Mountains, water, and sky offer scale that technology cannot replace. The concept of time itself feels different here. Days are not always measured by productivity. Seasons matter more than schedules. Long winters invite reflection and rest. Summers demand effort and activity. This cyclical experience creates a sense of continuity, grounding people in repetition rather than progression alone. Younger generations grow up with both modern awareness and deep connection to place. They learn global knowledge alongside local understanding. They know how to navigate digital spaces and wilderness alike. This duality shapes a future that honors both innovation and tradition. Despite global challenges, Alaska maintains emotional distance from constant crisis. Concerns are acknowledged, but reactions are measured. Experience has taught that panic offers no solution. Observation, preparation, and patience remain more effective tools. As time moves forward, Alaska does not seek to define itself loudly. It does not compete for attention. Its identity is carried quietly through landscape, routine, and memory. The land continues to teach the same lessons it always has, that endurance matters more than speed and balance more than expansion. As you imagine this final chapter, picture a wide horizon under a calm sky, a person standing still, breathing slowly. No rush, no demand, just presence. This is Alaska at the edge of time, a place where the past remains close, where the future is approached gently. Life here continues not by chasing what comes next, but by staying grounded in what endures. And as the hours pass and the land settles into silence once more, Alaska remains steady and whole, carrying its long story forward quietly, patiently, and without end.